gazing into a mirror on a quiet morning, you might catch yourself questioning whether the familiar face before you is a true reflection of your inner self or simply a projection molded by the ebb and flow of your thoughts and feelings. The mirror paradox challenges the conventional notion of a static identity by suggesting that what we see is more like a fleeting image, continually reshaped by our emotional state, memories, and daily experiences. Much like a funhouse mirror that bends and twists your appearance based on the angle of the light, our self-image shifts with the subtle interplay of our internal conditions. Imagine waking up feeling exuberant one day, only to look into the mirror later and see hints of doubt or fatigue altering that reflection. Just as the brightness in a room can transform the look of a familiar object, our inner thoughts and moods act as the changing light that molds our self-perception. This means that the me you believe is constant is actually a dynamic projection, susceptible to the nuances of each passing moment. In everyday situations, this might resemble how a favorite piece of clothing looks entirely different in the soft glow of dawn compared to the harsh midday sun, reminding us that appearances are rarely fixed. When we extend this idea to group decisions or voting, it becomes clear that each individual's input is filtered through a personal lens that is just as mutable and variable. The collective outcome, then, is the sum of many shifting reflections, each shaped by internal states that might differ dramatically from one moment to the next. Recognizing the mirror paradox helps us understand that the apparent consistency in our decisions may be illusory, and that appreciating this fluidity is essential for grasping the complexities of group dynamics and the inherent challenges in achieving a truly unified consensus. The dream inquiry: have you ever awoken from a vivid dream, feeling as though you'd lived an alternate life, only to be startled by the realization that it was all a nocturnal illusion? The dream inquiry delves into this blurry line between our sleeping fantasies and waking realities, challenging the assumption that our day-to-day experiences are as fixed and reliable as they seem. In dreams, events and characters weave together in surreal, sometimes nonsensical ways that feel entirely coherent until morning light dissolves their hold on you. Think about that moment when you recall a dream so intense that its emotions linger, coloring your decisions for the day even though the dream itself is gone. Just as a dream storyline can seem plausible in the moment yet vanish under scrutiny, our perceptions and judgments during waking hours are often influenced by fleeting images and subconscious narratives. Imagine attending a routine meeting and later realizing that your initial reaction was tinted by an inexplicable, dreamlike premonition. This is how our mind sometimes blurs the boundary between what is real and what is imagined. Everyday life offers many such examples, like the way a daydream might temporarily alter your mood or sway your perspective on a minor decision. In group decision-making or voting, the dream inquiry reminds us that each participant's contributions may be colored by these transient, subconscious influences, making the overall outcome a mosaic of both conscious thought and dreamlike impressions. Ultimately, this paradox teaches us that the clarity we expect in our decisions is often intermingled with the ephemeral qualities of our subconscious, a crucial insight for understanding the nuanced and sometimes unpredictable nature of collective choice. The narrative self: step into the role of an author in your own life's unfolding drama, and you might realize that your identity is not a fixed script but a story continuously written and rewritten with each experience. The narrative self posits that who we are is less a solid, unchanging entity and more the evolving tale we construct through our memories, emotions, and day-to-day events. Just as an author might revise a chapter to better capture the truth of a character's journey, we selectively recall and reinterpret past events to form a coherent sense of self, even if that narrative is as fluid as a well-edited story. Picture a day at work where a minor setback is later reframed as a stepping stone to future success. The way you tell that story to yourself, and perhaps to others, helps shape your identity in subtle, powerful ways. Everyday examples abound, recounting a family dinner differently from one person to the next, or emphasizing certain details in a personal anecdote to highlight resilience, reveals that our internal narratives are subject to constant change. In group settings or voting scenarios, This means that the opinions each person brings to the table are informed by personal stories that are in continuous flux, leading to a collective outcome that is as varied and dynamic as the narratives themselves. The narrative self reminds us that our sense of identity is a living, breathing tale, one that grows, and sometimes contradicts itself as we accumulate experiences. Ultimately, understanding that our identity is an ever-evolving narrative is essential for appreciating how individual stories contribute to and complicate collective decisions. The memory illusion. Imagine assembling an old jigsaw puzzle only to find that the picture seems to change each time you place a new piece. A reminder that our recollections are not perfect records but malleable reconstructions. The memory illusion challenges the belief that our memories are unerring snapshots of the past, suggesting instead that they are fluid, often altered by time, emotion, and subsequent experiences. Just as a well-worn photograph might fade or develop unexpected colors as it ages, our memories can shift, highlighting certain details while obscuring others. Think of a family gathering where one person remembers a joyful celebration while another recalls a quieter, more somber event. These differences arise not because the event itself changed, but because each individual's recollection has been subtly reshaped over time. Everyday life offers a similar phenomenon. You might return to a favorite childhood spot only to find that your emotional response has shifted, influenced by years of new experiences. In the context of group decisions or voting, the memory illusion underscores how each person's contribution is based on personal recollections that may differ significantly from one another, complicating efforts to form a cohesive view of past events. The result is a collective memory that is as fragmented and variable as the individual pieces that form it. Recognizing the fallibility of our memories helps us appreciate the challenges of making decisions based on shared histories, as discrepancies in recollection can lead to conflicting priorities and outcomes. Ultimately, the memory illusion teaches us that acknowledging the inherent variability of memory is key to understanding and improving the fairness of group decisions, reminding us that our shared past is often as subjective as it is significant. The observer conundrum. Imagine watching your life unfold on a screen where you are both the lead actor and the critical director, simultaneously experiencing events and analyzing them from afar. This is the essence of the observer conundrum. This paradox delves into the dual nature of our consciousness, where we exist as both participants in our lives and detached observers of our own actions. It's like being at a live concert where you not only feel the music coursing through your veins but also find yourself stepping back to evaluate your every move, questioning whether you're truly immersed or simply playing a part. In everyday situations, this split perspective might emerge when you're faced with a tough decision, such as choosing between two job offers, and you find your emotions urging one choice while your critical mind debates the practicalities of the other. This internal division, where one part of you experiences the moment fully while another part scrutinizes it, can lead to conflicting impulses and hesitation. Consider the simple act of making a purchase. You might feel an immediate desire for an item but then pause to analyze if it's truly necessary, effectively splitting your attention between impulse and reason. In group decision-making or voting, the observer conundrum reveals that the opinions we share are not purely instinctive. They are the product of both immediate reactions and reflective judgments that may not always align. This dual role can introduce complexities, as our contributions are colored by both our heartfelt experiences and our detached critiques. Ultimately, the observer conundrum reminds us that self-awareness, while valuable, can also complicate our choices, making it essential to recognize how our inner split affects our participation in collective decisions. Embracing this paradox is vital for understanding how our dual perspectives shape not only personal choices but also the outcomes of group endeavors. The division of self. Imagine drawing an invisible line in the sand that divides your inner world from everything outside it, a boundary so subtle that you might not even notice it, yet it shapes every thought and decision you make. The division of self proposes that our identity is nothing more than a construct created by this very line, a separation that distinguishes our private emotions, beliefs, and memories from the external world we interact with. In essence, the I we refer to is simply an arbitrarily drawn boundary that separates the internal musings of our mind from the influences of our surroundings. Consider, for instance, the way you might react differently when alone versus in a group. The inner thoughts that arise in solitude might be kept hidden or altered when you step into a social setting. Much like a smartphone, whose elegant exterior belies the intricate hardware within, our external persona is only a part of who we are, leaving a vast, uncharted territory of internal life that often remains unspoken. Everyday examples of this division can be found in moments of hesitation or conflict, when you're forced to choose between following a gut instinct and adhering to social expectations. The internal dialogue and the external voice can seem to pull you in opposite directions. This paradox matters because it reveals how our personal decisions, including those made in group settings or voting scenarios, are the outcome of a constant negotiation between two seemingly distinct realms. The clarity of our choices may be compromised by the tension between the genuine self that dwells within and the role we perform for the outside world. Ultimately, the division of self reminds us that the opinions we contribute to collective decisions are filtered through a dual lens, one that is internally driven and one that is externally influenced, making the process of reaching a unified conclusion inherently complex. The void of essence. Picture standing at the edge of an expansive, dark cave, where the echo of your footsteps fades into an endless emptiness. This is the feeling evoked by the void of essence. This paradox challenges the conventional notion of a solid, unchanging self by suggesting that what we call me might be nothing more than an empty space yearning for meaning. Instead of being a well-defined core, our identity could be likened to a blank canvas, continuously waiting for the brushstrokes of experience, emotion, and thought to give it shape. Consider how, on a foggy morning, familiar landmarks can appear blurred or even vanish altogether, leaving you to question the solidity of what you once knew. In everyday life, you might find yourself in moments where your sense of purpose seems to evaporate, like waking up without a clear plan for the day or feeling lost in the midst of overwhelming choices. These experiences illustrate the void of essence, a state where the fundamental self dissolves into an amorphous potential, open to reinterpretation with every new experience. In group decision-making or voting, this paradox underscores the reality that each person's contribution is made from an uncertain foundation, a core that might be as fluid and elusive as a shadow in dim light. Recognizing that our sense of self might be an ever-shifting void helps us appreciate the challenges inherent in collective choices, where the absence of a fixed identity can lead to unpredictable outcomes. In the end, the void of essence invites us to embrace uncertainty as a vital aspect of understanding both personal identity and the dynamics of group decisions. The ocean of consciousness. Imagine yourself as a single drop in a vast, rolling ocean, an experience that captures the essence of the ocean of consciousness. This paradox invites you to view your individual awareness not as an isolated island, but as an integral part of a boundless sea of collective experience and shared existence. In this perspective, your thoughts, emotions, and perceptions merge seamlessly with those of countless others, much like individual water droplets that come together to form a mighty ocean. Think about how a small stream contributes to the flow of a river, which eventually joins the sea, influencing its tides and currents even though its contribution seems minuscule on its own. Everyday scenarios mirror this idea. When you listen to a friend's advice or participate in a community event, your personal experiences blend with others, creating a richer, more complex tapestry of understanding. The ocean of consciousness challenges the notion of a self-contained identity by suggesting that our awareness is continuously influenced by a collective, interconnected stream of thoughts and emotions. This shared consciousness means that our decisions, be they personal choices or votes in a group decision, are never entirely our own, but are part of a larger, fluid dialogue among many individuals. Such a realization is crucial when considering group dynamics, as it reveals that our choices are influenced by a confluence of external inputs, much like waves that shape the surface of the ocean. Ultimately, understanding the ocean of consciousness encourages us to see our individual actions as ripples in a vast sea, reminding us that group decisions are the product of an intricate interplay between personal insight and collective influence. The solipsistic dilemma. Imagine living in a world where every sound, sight, and touch is a creation of your own mind. A disconcerting thought that encapsulates the solipsistic dilemma. This paradox questions whether anything exists beyond our own perception, suggesting that if all we experience is generated by our inner workings, the very notion of an external, independent reality becomes dubious. Consider the experience of watching a movie. While you are immersed in the storyline, you are also aware that the characters and events are fabrications on a screen. In a similar vein, the solipsistic dilemma proposes that everything we know, our relationships, the society we interact with, and even the decisions we make collectively, could merely be projections of our own consciousness. Everyday analogies for this concept might include the way a person engrossed in a novel might momentarily forget the difference between the fictional world and their own life, or how the sound of an echo can make you question the source of the sound. This idea forces us to reconsider the basis of our group decisions and voting processes, where the assumption is that each opinion comes from an independent, external perspective. However, our perceptions are self-generated, then each individual's contribution might be less about an objective reality and more about a subjective inner narrative. The solipsistic dilemma is a humbling reminder that the certainty we place in the external world may be as fragile as the images on a screen. Ultimately, acknowledging this paradox challenges us to re-examine the underpinnings of our decisions, encouraging a deeper inquiry into how personal perceptions shape group outcomes and the very nature of our collective existence. The absence of core. Envision trying to grasp a handful of water, only to have it slip through your fingers and vanish into the air. This fleeting sensation captures the essence of the absence of core. This paradox challenges the traditional belief that our identity is anchored by a central, unchanging essence, suggesting instead that our sense of self might be more like an ever-shifting cloud, constantly reformed by new experiences and ideas. Imagine how a building constructed on sand is continuously reshaped by the shifting winds. Similarly, our identity is molded by every interaction, memory, and emotion, leaving no fixed center to truly call home. In everyday life, you might experience moments when your convictions and desires seem to change with little warning, like suddenly favoring a new hobby or reconsidering long-held beliefs after a meaningful conversation. These experiences illustrate that our internal core is not a solid, permanent entity but a dynamic process, subject to constant evolution. In the context of group decisions or voting, the absence of core is particularly significant because it suggests that the basis for each person's opinion is fluid and mutable. When people come together to make a decision, the lack of a fixed personal foundation can lead to unexpected shifts in consensus, as individuals' views evolve with each new piece of information or emotional insight. Ultimately, the absence of core reminds us that both individual identities and collective choices are not anchored in permanence, but are continuously created and recreated. Recognizing this dynamic nature is essential for understanding the complexities of group decision-making, where the ever-changing inner landscape of each participant plays a crucial role in shaping the final outcome. The ephemeral existence. A sudden encounter with impermanence can unsettle even our most deeply held beliefs about who we are, revealing that our sense of self is as transient as the moments that constitute our lives. The ephemeral existence paradox challenges the notion of a lasting identity by asserting that every experience, emotion, and thought is but a brief flicker in the continuum of time. In our daily routines, we might observe how a burst of inspiration or a strong conviction fades as quickly as it appears, much like the brilliance of a sunset that gradually yields to the night. Consider the way you feel after an intense conversation or a moment of profound realization. Those emotions peak and then recede, leaving behind only a memory of what once was. This constant state of flux means that our decisions, whether personal or made collectively, are often based on conditions that are inherently temporary. When people come together to vote or decide on an issue, the underlying opinions and attitudes driving those decisions might shift by the very next day. reminding us that what seems like a permanent stance is actually subject to change. The paradox teaches us that the self is not an unyielding core but rather an ever-changing tapestry of fleeting experiences, each influencing the next in unpredictable ways. A practical example can be seen in how a community might rally around a cause in one season, only to see enthusiasm wane as circumstances evolve, a clear demonstration of how transient passions can shape group dynamics. Ultimately, recognizing the ephemeral nature of our existence encourages a more flexible, adaptive approach to decision-making, emphasizing the need to appreciate the present moment while remaining open to change. This insight is crucial for understanding how individual moods and shifting priorities can profoundly affect the outcomes of collective choices, highlighting the importance of acknowledging impermanence in group decisions or voting. The simulation hypothesis, a provocative inquiry into the fabric of our reality, compels us to consider whether our lives are the product of an elaborate simulation rather than an organic unfolding of events. The simulation hypothesis posits that everything we experience, from our emotions and sensory perceptions to our decision-making processes, might be the outcome of a meticulously designed algorithm. Reflect on the modern fascination with virtual worlds and video games, where every detail is programmed and every event preordained, yet the experience feels undeniably real. In a similar fashion, our lives may be governed by a complex set of rules and parameters that create the illusion of free will and individuality. Everyday instances, such as the precise way a computer predicts the weather or the seamless operation of automated systems, provide a glimpse into how advanced simulations function, suggesting that the boundaries between genuine experience and artificial constructs can be remarkably blurred. This perspective invites us to question the authenticity of our choices. If our preferences and decisions are predetermined by underlying code, then what does it mean to exercise independent judgment, particularly when casting a vote or contributing to a group decision? The idea that our reality could be nothing more than a digital construct challenges traditional notions of agency and accountability, urging us to rethink the significance of our actions. Ultimately, the simulation hypothesis serves as a reminder that the certainty of our existence may be an elaborate performance, where the true nature of reality is hidden beneath layers of simulation. In the context of collective decision-making, this paradox underscores the complexities inherent in attributing genuine autonomy to each individual's vote, suggesting that group outcomes may be influenced by unseen forces beyond our control. The flow of time, an unexpected glance at the ticking clock, can reveal how profoundly time shapes our identity and decisions, suggesting that our very existence is molded by the relentless current of temporal change. The flow of time paradox examines how the passage of time is not merely a backdrop for our lives but an active, dynamic force that alters our perceptions, priorities, and even our sense of self. Our memories, experiences, and moods are continuously updated as time moves forward, much like a river that erodes its banks and reshapes the landscape with each passing moment. Consider how a decision made in the heat of the moment might be reconsidered in the calm of hindsight. This shifting perspective is a testament to the transient influence of time on our judgment. Everyday examples include the way seasonal changes can affect our mood and energy levels, or how a personal accomplishment might seem monumental at first but eventually recedes into the broader context of our life story. When it comes to group decision-making or voting, the flow of time introduces an additional layer of complexity, as opinions and collective priorities evolve with new information and changing circumstances. This paradox reminds us that the decisions we make are deeply intertwined with the temporal context in which they occur, making it essential to consider how time affects both individual and collective choices. Ultimately, the flow of time encourages a recognition of the mutable nature of our decisions, urging us to remain adaptable and mindful of how past experiences, current trends, and future expectations interact. This awareness is critical for understanding the dynamic processes behind group decisions, where the temporal element can shape outcomes in unexpected ways. The subjective lens. A single moment of introspection can reveal that our understanding of the world is never objective but always filtered through a uniquely personal lens. The subjective lens paradox challenges the assumption that our perceptions are impartial representations of reality by emphasizing that every experience is inherently colored by individual biases, emotions, and prior experiences. Much like how different pairs of glasses can alter the clarity and hue of the same view, our inner frameworks determine what we see and how we interpret events. Reflect on an occasion when two people witnessed the same incident yet recalled it in entirely different ways. This divergence underscores how personal history and perspective influence our interpretation of facts. Everyday life is filled with instances where subjective viewpoints can lead to misunderstandings or disagreements, whether it's in a conversation among friends or a heated discussion in a community meeting. When it comes to group decision-making or voting, the subjective lens means that each participant's input is inevitably filtered through personal experiences and biases, making it challenging to achieve an outcome that is entirely objective. The paradox invites us to consider that the fairness of collective decisions may be compromised by the inherent variability of individual perspectives. Acknowledging this can help foster a more empathetic approach to discussions, encouraging us to value diverse viewpoints while striving for clarity and fairness in the decision-making process. Ultimately, the subjective lens reminds us that our grasp on reality is always partial and that appreciating the role of personal bias is essential for making sense of both our own actions and the collective choices of a group. The fractured self, a deep dive into our inner world, often reveals a startling truth. Rather than being a unified whole, our identity can be as fragmented as shards of broken glass. The fractured self paradox challenges the conventional notion of a coherent, singular identity by suggesting that what we consider our self is actually a collection of disparate elements shaped by varied experiences, conflicting emotions, and diverse influences. When you reflect on moments of inner conflict or indecision, you might notice how different parts of your personality seem to pull you in opposite directions, much like a group of individuals with distinct opinions working together in a committee. Everyday examples include the internal debates you experience when making important choices, whether to pursue a career opportunity or maintain a long-standing relationship, where different voices within you advocate for opposing paths. This fragmentation is not necessarily a sign of weakness. Rather, it highlights the complexity of human nature, where each fragment of the self contributes a unique perspective and set of values. In the context of group decision-making or voting, the fractured self illustrates how the multitude of internal voices can mirror the diverse opinions present in a collective, making it difficult to achieve consensus. Recognizing this inner division can lead to a more compassionate understanding of our own limitations and the challenges inherent in reconciling different viewpoints. Ultimately, the fractured self teaches us that our personal identity is a mosaic of varied experiences and influences, and that acknowledging this complexity is vital for appreciating how individual conflicts and alliances shape group outcomes. This insight is crucial for understanding why achieving a unified decision in a diverse group is often as challenging as reconciling the many facets of our own fragmented identity. The mirage of identity. There are moments when it feels as though we hold a clear, unwavering sense of who we are, yet upon closer inspection, this certainty can fade like a mirage in the desert. The mirage of identity highlights how the self we cling to may be less concrete than we assume, shaped by fleeting emotions, social roles, and the shifting narratives we construct in our minds. A person who was once confident in their career choice, for example, might later feel a profound disconnect from that same path, as though the ground beneath them has subtly shifted without warning. This sense of impermanence can manifest in day-to-day life, too, such as when someone revisits a childhood home and finds that cherished memories don't align with the physical reality before them. What seemed to be an integral part of one's identity can suddenly appear hazy, revealing that our notion of self is not fixed but rather a fluid reflection of circumstance. When you consider how your tastes in music, friendships, or personal values might evolve over time, it becomes evident that identity is more a series of overlapping snapshots than a continuous, unbroken thread. Much like a shimmering mirage on the horizon that disappears upon approach, our self-image can dissolve when subjected to deeper scrutiny, leaving us to wonder what truly defines me. This uncertainty can be especially pertinent in group decision-making or voting, where each participant's evolving sense of self influences the collective outcome. If we recognize that our identities are not carved in stone, then it follows that our stances and judgments may also shift in response to new experiences or insights. As a result, achieving unanimous agreement might prove elusive, given that each individual's identity is in flux. The mirage of identity ultimately reminds us that who we are is neither singular nor permanent, and that embracing this fluidity can lead to a more empathetic and nuanced understanding of how people approach collective choices. The fabricated persona. A glance in the mirror or a casual conversation can sometimes hint that the face we show the world is a carefully crafted creation rather than a direct expression of our innermost being. The fabricated persona paradox suggests that much of our outward identity is a defense mechanism, designed to protect us from judgment or to fulfill certain social expectations. Consider how someone might adopt different mannerisms at work compared to when they're at home. This shift is a subtle cue that they're adjusting their persona to suit the environment. On social media, the effect is even more pronounced. People often present an idealized image that highlights achievements while concealing vulnerabilities. This curated behavior is akin to an actor stepping into various roles, each with its own costume, script, and supporting cast. Such adaptations can be useful, allowing us to navigate complex societal structures and maintain relationships, but they also raise questions about authenticity. If a persona is selected to impress or to blend in, then how much of it reflects genuine selfhood? Over time, this staged presentation may cause internal tension, who we truly are versus who we feel pressured to be. This dichotomy can become evident in group settings or voting processes, where individuals might adopt stances that align with the persona they've built, rather than a deeply held conviction. The potential for collective decisions to be shaped by these outward performances rather than honest self-expression can lead to dissonance within the group. When everyone is trying to play their part effectively, the genuine diversity of viewpoints might be overshadowed by a desire to conform. Recognizing that aspects of our identity can be fabricated and that this performance is often influenced by social pressures, prompts a deeper look at the authenticity of our contributions. Ultimately, the fabricated persona paradox reminds us that while playing different roles can help us adapt, it also risks obscuring our true motivations when critical group decisions are at stake. The dependency paradox. Life often teaches us to value independence, yet paradoxically, our very sense of self is deeply entwined with the people and systems around us. The dependency paradox proposes that the boundaries we draw to define ourselves as autonomous beings are, in fact, permeable and dependent on a larger network of social, economic, and emotional connections. For instance, a person who prides themselves on being self-made likely relies on a supportive community, education, or even essential infrastructure that enables their personal achievements. These dependencies extend into our emotional worlds as well. An individual's self-esteem might hinge on validation from friends or family, reflecting how interwoven our sense of identity becomes with external feedback. Day-to-day scenarios reveal how this paradox plays out. Someone might confidently declare their independence, yet still check reviews or seek recommendations before making a purchase. The interplay between perceived autonomy and hidden reliance is at the core of the dependency paradox, highlighting that what we often label as self-sufficiency is partially sustained by others. In group decision-making or voting situations, this interdependence becomes even more apparent. Voters frequently consult trusted sources, community leaders, or public opinion before forming their own stance, which means their final choice is less an isolated act of free will and more a product of shared knowledge and social influence. Understanding this dynamic can shed light on why collective outcomes sometimes seem at odds with the principle of individual choice, because each person's decision is inextricably linked to the perspectives and resources provided by others. Ultimately, acknowledging the dependency paradox enriches our comprehension of both personal identity and collective processes. Rather than viewing ourselves as entirely independent actors, we can appreciate the subtle but profound ways in which our thoughts, preferences, and decisions are shaped by the web of connections we occupy, prompting a more inclusive approach to group discussions and community voting. The shadow of thought. Certain moments of introspection can reveal a hidden undercurrent in our mental life, suggesting that our conscious mind is just one layer of a more extensive network of ideas and impulses. The shadow of thought paradox argues that not all of our thinking is readily accessible or easily understood, pointing to subconscious processes that influence us in powerful yet elusive ways. A simple example might be a sudden surge of anxiety when encountering a seemingly harmless situation. This reaction can sometimes be traced back to unrecognized memories or internal narratives that dwell beneath conscious awareness. Similar to how a photograph's negative can contain details not immediately visible in the finished print, our unacknowledged thoughts shape our behavior and preferences even if we can't fully articulate them. In everyday life, this hidden dimension can manifest in decisions that baffle us upon later reflection, like spontaneously turning down an opportunity or feeling an unexplainable affinity towards someone we barely know. During group decisions or voting processes, these subconscious currents can play a significant role, influencing how we interpret facts or align with certain perspectives. While the dialogue might appear entirely logical on the surface, underlying biases or unspoken emotions can steer the conversation in subtle ways. Recognizing the shadow of thought encourages a measure of humility when assessing our own choices, as it highlights that our reasoning might not be as transparent as we believe. Furthermore, it underscores the importance of creating environments where participants can explore underlying motivations without fear of judgment. By acknowledging this hidden layer, groups can engage in deeper, more honest discussions that take into account the subconscious factors guiding their judgments. Ultimately, the paradox serves as a reminder that genuine self-awareness is an ongoing pursuit, and that understanding the role of unspoken influences is vital for reaching decisions that truly reflect the collective's best interests. The social construct. A fleeting glance at how cultural norms vary across regions and eras can challenge the belief that anything about human identity is purely natural, suggesting instead that much of who we are is shaped by shared ideas and conventions. The social construct paradox posits that the traits we often take for granted, such as gender roles, success markers, or moral codes, are largely products of communal agreements rather than intrinsic truths. Consider how an action deemed heroic in one society might be seen as reckless in another, revealing that collective values, rather than a universal standard, define our perception of right and wrong. This shaping force extends into personal identity. Someone might feel unfulfilled not because of inherent failings but because their goals are dictated by cultural expectations that don't align with their true preferences. On a smaller scale, think about everyday choices, like fashion or etiquette, which fluctuate dramatically depending on context and tradition, emphasizing how we adopt societal cues to fit into our surroundings. When people come together to make group decisions or cast votes, these shared constructs can unify or divide them, depending on how rigidly they adhere to cultural norms. A policy might gain widespread support in one setting while facing intense opposition in another, illustrating how social constructs play a pivotal role in shaping collective outcomes. Recognizing the social construct paradox is crucial for understanding that many of our assumed realities are, at their core, agreements we hold with those around us. By questioning which norms serve the public good and which may limit individual expression, communities can engage in more conscientious decision-making processes. Ultimately, this paradox invites a critical examination of how we define identity and norms, making it clear that cultural contexts are inextricably woven into our collective judgments, and reminding us that these constructs, though powerful, are not immovable. The symbolic entity. Sometimes our sense of self feels more like a collection of symbols and labels than a tangible, unchanging core. The symbolic entity paradox explores the idea that much of who we think we are is shaped by words, images, and societal constructs rather than a deeply rooted essence. Everyday life offers countless examples. A job title can become so central to one's identity that losing it triggers an existential crisis. Or a symbol of status, like a car or a piece of jewelry, can influence how we view ourselves and how others perceive us. These external markers act as shorthand for complex sets of beliefs and aspirations, turning identity into something that is represented as much by a constellation of cultural symbols as by any inherent personal trait. Even in private moments, individuals might gauge their worth by comparing themselves to symbols of success they've absorbed from family, media, or education. This reliance on symbolic reference can lead to a disconnect between how we present ourselves and who we truly feel we are inside, like a brand logo that suggests quality without revealing the intricate manufacturing process behind it. During group decisions or voting processes, symbols often take on a powerful role. Political campaigns, for instance, rely heavily on slogans, logos, and images that condense complex policies into memorable icons. Voters might align with these symbols rather than diving into the nuances of each proposal. As a result, the collective outcome can be swayed by how effectively these symbols resonate with people's internal narratives, rather than by a fully informed evaluation. Recognizing the symbolic entity paradox allows us to question whether we are defined by genuine substance or by the symbols we've adopted. By looking past labels and imagery, we can strive for deeper self-awareness and more thoughtful group deliberations. Ultimately, this paradox serves as a reminder that while symbols can bring clarity or unity, they can also obscure the rich complexity of who we are, making it vital to strike a balance between symbolic representation and genuine understanding when engaging in collective choices. The post hoc narrative. Many of us have experienced moments where we find ourselves explaining a choice we made, only to realize that our explanation might be more of a convenient story than the true reason behind the decision. The post hoc narrative paradox highlights how we often create justifications for our actions after the fact, constructing a cohesive tale that may not align perfectly with our original motivations. A classic scenario arises when someone buys an expensive item on impulse and then crafts a detailed rationale, like improved quality or long-term savings, to mask the initial spur-of-the-moment desire. On a day-to-day level, this tendency to rationalize can be seen in how we explain to ourselves why we prefer certain foods, people, or hobbies, weaving explanations that may not hold up to deeper scrutiny. These personal stories feel authentic precisely because we believe them wholeheartedly, yet they sometimes reveal more about our need for internal consistency than about the real catalysts for our behavior. In the realm of group decisions or voting, post hoc narratives can influence outcomes in subtle ways. Individuals might support a policy based on gut feeling or social conformity and later craft elaborate arguments to defend that choice. This behavior can shape public discourse, as each person's explanation contributes to a communal narrative that might stray from the initial reasons people supported an idea. Over time, these collective justifications can form a powerful consensus, even if the original motivations were less coherent than they now appear. Recognizing the post hoc narrative paradox encourages a more reflective approach to decision-making. Instead of rushing to justify or explain, we can pause to examine the genuine triggers behind our actions. By acknowledging this human tendency to rewrite history in favor of a neat story, both individuals and groups can foster a healthier environment for debate. Ultimately, this paradox reminds us that the tales we tell ourselves about our choices can be as influential as the real reasons behind them, urging us to remain open to questioning our own narratives and to be mindful of how such stories shape group outcomes. The subconscious puppeteer. A sudden, unexplainable urge to speak up in a meeting or the nagging feeling that something is off about a particular decision can sometimes seem to emerge from nowhere. The subconscious puppeteer paradox points out that much of our behavior may be guided by hidden mental processes rather than conscious, deliberate thought. Psychologists have long suggested that the unconscious mind, comprising repressed memories, habits, and unexamined beliefs, wields significant influence over our everyday actions, often pulling the strings without our full awareness. An individual might, for example, consistently choose friends who reinforce long-standing self-doubts, never consciously realizing that this pattern aligns with deep-seated feelings of unworthiness. In many cases, we create plausible explanations for these actions only after they occur, attributing them to logic or circumstance. This paradox becomes especially relevant in collective contexts, where group decisions or voting outcomes can hinge on impulses or biases that participants themselves do not recognize. People may align with a candidate because of subconscious associations. Perhaps the person reminds them of a respected family member, rather than thoroughly evaluating the platform. Over time, these unnoticed motivations can shape the direction of entire communities, as each group member's subconscious inclinations converge or clash in ways that are not openly discussed. Recognizing the subconscious puppeteer highlights the importance of introspection and awareness. If we acknowledge that hidden forces influence our decisions, we may become more open to questioning our initial reactions. Techniques like mindfulness, open dialogue, or the willingness to seek diverse perspectives can expose the underlying reasons behind our choices, fostering greater honesty and clarity. For groups, such self-examination can create an environment where unspoken biases are more readily identified and addressed. Ultimately, the subconscious puppeteer reminds us that genuine self-governance, whether on an individual or collective level, requires acknowledging the subtle, unseen factors that often determine what we do and why we do it. The paradox of contradiction. Occasionally, we find ourselves holding two beliefs that clash, yet we manage to keep both alive without fully resolving the tension. The paradox of contradiction explores this capacity to accommodate conflicting ideas within a single mindset, challenging the assumption that our convictions should always be logically consistent. A person might champion personal freedom while advocating for restrictive policies, or they might value open-mindedness yet reject any idea that challenges a cherished tradition. In day-to-day life, such contradictions can pass unnoticed, often masked by the complexity of modern living and the vast array of perspectives we encounter. These internal inconsistencies are not necessarily a sign of hypocrisy but rather a testament to the multifaceted nature of human cognition. Our brains can adapt to competing demands by compartmentalizing or prioritizing context over coherence. This paradox is highly visible in group decision-making or voting environments. Team members might collectively endorse a principle, like transparency, in one discussion, only to support actions that conflict with that principle in another. The group often rationalizes these contradictions, either by glossing over them or by framing them as unique exceptions. In political scenarios, a population may concurrently desire lower taxes and increased public services, showcasing the tension between conflicting priorities. Understanding the paradox of contradiction can lead to more open conversations about the inherent complexity in our beliefs. Instead of pushing people to choose one side definitively, acknowledging that contradictions exist can foster dialogue about what triggers each viewpoint and how to balance them effectively. For a community, this insight emphasizes the importance of nuanced policies and the acceptance that certain decisions might be more about managing competing values than finding a perfect, one-dimensional solution. Ultimately, the paradox of contradiction reminds us that holding conflicting beliefs is a hallmark of human nature, urging us to engage more honestly with the tensions that shape both individual actions and collective outcomes. The self-referential loop. At times, we define who we are based on explanations that originate within our own minds, creating a cycle where the self is both the subject and the source of its own narrative. The self-referential loop examines the idea that our identities can become self-reinforcing systems, sustained by the stories we tell ourselves about our motivations, capabilities, and worth. A person who believes they are destined for leadership might unconsciously seek opportunities that validate this image, then use those experiences as proof that their belief was correct all along. Over weeks and years, these internal feedback loops can become so ingrained that we seldom question their original assumptions. On a practical level, someone might label themselves not creative based on a single early failure, subsequently avoiding creative endeavors and using their lack of practice as confirmation of their initial self-assessment. When entire communities engage in these loops, collective identities can form around shared myths or traditional narratives, sometimes overshadowing actual data or contradictory personal experiences. This phenomenon is especially relevant in group decision-making or voting, where participants might cling to a narrative, "Our community values X above all else," even if evidence suggests that many members hold different priorities. The loop sustains itself through repetition, as each new decision is filtered through the same set of beliefs that initially formed. Recognizing the self-referential loop encourages a careful re-examination of the stories we rely on. Taking time to interrogate why we define ourselves a certain way, or why a group holds certain collective beliefs, can expose untested assumptions that have shaped our identity. By breaking or at least loosening these loops, individuals and communities can open themselves to new possibilities, re-evaluating choices that may have been made for reasons that were never fully understood. Ultimately, this paradox reminds us that self-definition is not merely a passive reflection of reality, but an active, ongoing process that can either restrict our growth or enable us to explore more expansive ways of being. The reflection in others. Sometimes it feels as though we only know ourselves through the lens provided by those around us, suggesting that our identities are deeply tied to how others see us. The reflection in others paradox highlights our reliance on social mirrors. We gather subtle cues from friends, family, and broader society, then integrate these signals into our self-concept. A person who is repeatedly praised for being the responsible one, for instance, may adopt conscientious behaviors to maintain that image, even if it doesn't entirely align with their private inclinations. Over time, these external reflections can overshadow personal exploration, creating a self that's shaped largely by how we want to be perceived. In casual day-to-day interactions, such as workplace settings or online forums, feedback loops form quickly. Compliments reinforce specific behaviors, while criticisms nudge us to avoid certain traits. Before long, you might find yourself navigating choices, like what clothes to wear or which opinions to share, based on anticipated reactions rather than genuine personal preference. During group decisions or voting processes, this paradox takes on a collective dimension. People often conform to the majority view or the stance of influential members to maintain positive perceptions, even if their private beliefs differ. The result can be a consensus that reflects mutual reinforcement rather than an authentic exchange of ideas. Recognizing the reflection in others encourages a more introspective approach, one that questions whether we are acting out of genuine conviction or responding to expectations. By acknowledging the extent to which we rely on social approval, we can begin to separate internal motivations from external pressures. This awareness can benefit both personal development and group outcomes, as it prompts a healthier balance between respecting community norms and staying true to individual insights. Ultimately, this paradox reminds us that while external validation can be a powerful force for social cohesion, it can also obscure our genuine impulses, shaping who we believe ourselves to be in ways that aren't always in line with our deeper needs and values. The networked self. Modern life increasingly reveals that we are not isolated entities but nodes in a vast web of social, technological, and cultural connections, a perspective captured by the networked self paradox. This concept challenges the idea of a separate, solitary identity by showing how our thoughts, actions, and even feelings can be significantly influenced by the networks we belong to. A simple example might be how quickly a rumor spreads through social media, shaping public opinion and, in turn, altering how individuals within the network perceive and define themselves. Whether through friend groups, professional associations, or global online communities, our sense of self is constantly being updated by the flow of information and interaction. Even personal decisions, like where to dine or which product to buy, can be driven by collective data such as ratings, reviews, or trending recommendations, highlighting just how interconnected our individual choices have become. In group decision-making or voting contexts, this interconnectedness can complicate the notion of independent judgment. Members of a community might feel swayed by a loud minority on social platforms, or by the echo chamber of friends who share similar views, leading to outcomes that reflect shared biases rather than objective assessments. On the other hand, Being part of a network can also enhance collective wisdom if diverse viewpoints are encouraged and validated. Recognizing the networked self can remind us to remain vigilant about the external influences that shape our decisions. Asking questions like, am I holding this belief because I've authentically arrived at it, or because my network endorses it, can foster more individual accountability. At the same time, it can drive us to participate responsibly in these networks, understanding that our expressions and votes feed back into the system, affecting others' senses of self and their eventual choices. Ultimately, this paradox underscores the delicate balance between benefiting from the knowledge and support of our interconnected world and retaining a genuine sense of personal agency in our contributions and beliefs. The epistemological puzzle. Occasionally, we encounter moments when it becomes unclear how much of what we know actually stands on firm ground, drawing attention to the epistemological puzzle paradox. This puzzle revolves around the difficulty of verifying our assumptions and beliefs, given that our knowledge often relies on layers of interpretation, secondhand information, and personal biases. A story told by a friend might be embellished, news sources could spin facts, or our own memories could shift over time, yet we tend to trust these inputs unless we have concrete reasons not to. Everyday life is packed with scenarios where we accept certain details at face value, ranging from social gossip to historical accounts, without considering how these accounts might have been filtered or distorted. This uncertainty extends into group decision-making or voting, where the information that shapes collective outcomes is usually funneled through various channels before reaching each participant. One faction in a debate might lean heavily on specific statistics, while another might rely on anecdotal evidence, leaving the group with the challenge of reconciling differing forms of knowledge. Disentangling reliable information from misinterpretation becomes an uphill battle, especially when personal convictions or social alliances come into play. Recognizing the epistemological puzzle can prompt a more critical examination of how we gather and process information. For instance, taking the time to investigate source credibility or to understand opposing viewpoints in depth can mitigate the risks of biased or incomplete knowledge. In a communal context, acknowledging this paradox paves the way for more transparent and open discussions, where people feel encouraged to question the basis of the facts being presented. Ultimately, the epistemological puzzle reminds us that much of our shared reality is constructed from layers of interpretation, calling for caution and humility in both individual decision-making and collective consensus building. By embracing the inevitable gaps in our understanding, we can strive to remain receptive to new insights and more flexible in adapting our views as additional information comes to light. The dissonance of belief. Sometimes we cling to a belief so firmly that encountering contradictory evidence feels disorienting or even threatening, revealing what can be described as the dissonance of belief paradox. This notion highlights how our minds can resist reshaping long-held convictions, even when new facts emerge that directly challenge them. A classic example arises when someone invests years into mastering a skill they now find obsolete. Acknowledging that their efforts no longer hold relevance can be psychologically unsettling. In day-to-day conversations, people might dismiss inconvenient data or reinterpret it in a way that preserves their original stance, a process driven by the need to maintain internal harmony. This dissonance becomes particularly pronounced in group settings, where collective pride in a shared identity or narrative may overshadow contradictory experiences. For instance, a community might avoid confronting environmental issues if doing so would invalidate their sense of responsible stewardship. During voting or public discourse, contradictory messages sometimes lead groups to double down on familiar beliefs, reinforcing them with greater fervor to ward off the discomfort of cognitive conflict. Recognizing the dissonance of belief is crucial for fostering more open-minded discussions. Instead of perceiving contrary information as an attack on one's identity or values, acknowledging this paradox allows for the possibility that adapting to new evidence is a sign of growth rather than weakness. Groups that actively encourage respectful exploration of opposing viewpoints and question long-standing assumptions can more effectively navigate complex societal or organizational challenges. Ultimately, The dissonance of belief paradox underscores the tension between our desire for certainty and the world's persistent complexity. Accepting that clinging to outdated perspectives can hamper constructive decision-making is the first step toward cultivating a culture of critical thinking and resilience, where beliefs evolve in response to credible evidence and a genuine willingness to learn. The data of experience. It is tempting to assume that personal experience offers indisputable proof of our reality, yet the data of experience paradox suggests that even direct encounters can be filtered through subjective lenses. Each of us carries mental models that interpret events, forming biases and emotional responses that influence how we process what happens around us. Two people attending the same concert might have vastly different takeaways. One praises the exhilarating atmosphere, while the other focuses on the overcrowding and noise. This disparity arises from individual expectations, past encounters, and emotional states, all of which tint the raw data of experience. In daily life, we tend to trust our perspective implicitly, rarely pausing to consider how much of our interpretation might be shaped by personal context or fleeting moods. When it comes to collective decisions or voting, the influence of these differing experiential filters becomes even more apparent. A public policy might receive enthusiastic support from one segment of the population that perceives immediate benefits, while another group, shaped by contrasting experiences or priorities, rejects it outright. Debates can turn heated precisely because each side believes its viewpoint is validated by lived experience. Recognizing the data of experience paradox can encourage individuals to question their own interpretations, opening a space for empathy and understanding of others' viewpoints. Rather than invalidating personal stories, acknowledging this paradox highlights that experience alone does not guarantee objectivity. It prompts us to seek broader contexts or additional data that might counterbalance the limitations imposed by our personal lens. In the end, this understanding fosters a more inclusive approach to group discussions, where diverse experiences are not automatically dismissed but examined critically to form a well-rounded consensus. By appreciating how personal filters shape our reality, we become more capable of bridging gaps in collective decision-making, ultimately leading to outcomes that reflect a deeper, shared understanding among participants. The illusion of continuity. A quiet moment of self-reflection can sometimes uncover a surprising truth. Our sense of an unbroken personal history may be a carefully stitched tapestry rather than an unaltered thread running through our lives. The illusion of continuity suggests that although we believe our identity flows seamlessly from childhood to the present, it is actually assembled from discrete mental snapshots pieced together by memory and habit. If you think back to your teenage self, you might recall certain traits and relationships that feel wildly distant from who you are now, indicating that gradual changes have accumulated into a shifted sense of self, even if you didn't notice them happening day by day. It's reminiscent of flipping through an old photo album, where each image captures a specific instant, yet our mind insists on transforming these separate moments into a continuous storyline. In everyday life, this paradox can manifest when you revisit a favorite childhood place and realize how many subtle yet profound alterations have unfolded within you, even though you still feel like yourself. During group decisions or voting, the same illusion can lead participants to assume that everyone's stance remains unchanged over time. In reality, a person's opinions can evolve due to new insights, emotional growth, or shifting circumstances, yet the group might overlook these incremental adjustments because they seem too small to notice until they accumulate into a significant shift. A policy once embraced with enthusiasm might now spark hesitation, and the individual may struggle to articulate why they've changed, since the transformation occurred gradually. Recognizing the illusion of continuity is important for collective processes because it encourages a more nuanced view of personal growth. Instead of treating people's perspectives as static, it allows space for individuals to acknowledge how accumulated experiences have reshaped their thinking. It also reminds the group to remain open to fresh perspectives, since even long-held positions may have quietly morphed under the surface. Ultimately, this paradox underscores that identity is a patchwork of evolving pieces rather than a seamless ribbon of sameness, which has significant implications for how we interpret each other's consistency, or lack thereof, when making decisions or casting votes. The questioning gaze. A sudden burst of self-awareness can feel like catching your own reflection in a window, leaving you to wonder whether you're watching yourself or truly living in the moment. The questioning gaze paradox examines the odd duality of being both actor and audience in our own lives, constantly observing ourselves even as we participate in day-to-day activities. Perhaps you've found yourself narrating your own thoughts during a conversation, as if offering a mental play-by-play to an invisible watcher. This internal commentary can help us make sense of our actions, but it can also lead to overthinking and second-guessing. In simple tasks, like choosing a meal at a restaurant, part of you might watch the other part decide, analyzing whether you're picking something healthy or simply giving in to cravings. Such self-scrutiny is useful for personal growth, yet it can also introduce hesitation or doubt, especially in high-pressure scenarios. In a group decision or voting context, the questioning gaze can lead individuals to doubt their motivations, wondering if they truly believe in a cause or are merely influenced by how they want to be perceived. It can also prompt members to scrutinize each other's behaviors, searching for hidden agendas or inconsistencies. This intense observation can foster a careful, deliberate approach but risks stalling the process if people become too caught up in self-conscious loops. Recognizing the questioning gaze highlights the delicate balance between healthy introspection and paralyzing overanalysis. By acknowledging that we can't completely escape this internal observer, both individuals and groups can strive to focus on meaningful dialogue rather than the fear of being judged by others or by themselves. Ultimately, this paradox underscores the value of self-awareness in decision-making, while also reminding us that excessive self-monitoring can hinder genuine participation. Learning to trust our instincts and experiences, even under the gaze of our own internal witness, can create a more fluid, authentic exchange of ideas when casting votes or shaping collective actions. The hidden self, an offhand remark from a friend or a fleeting pang of unease can reveal traits we barely realized were part of us, pointing to the hidden self paradox, a reminder that we rarely see our entire psyche in plain view. Beneath the persona we project in social situations lies a deeper layer of motivations, insecurities, and subconscious impulses that shape our decisions, often without our awareness. You might find yourself inexplicably averse to a particular person, only to later discover they remind you of a distant memory or past hurt. In everyday life, these concealed elements guide us toward certain choices and away from others, quietly nudging our moods or altering our perception of events. Over time, patterns can emerge, like feeling consistently anxious when tackling specific tasks, which may stem from an unresolved personal experience hidden in the back of our mind. In group decision-making or voting scenarios, the hidden self plays a key role in shaping opinions that appear logical on the surface but are actually fueled by unseen emotional undercurrents. A leader's charisma might appeal to deep-seated yearnings for security or belonging, making us favor their proposals even if the practical merits are unclear. Recognizing this dynamic can foster empathy among group members, as it clarifies why people sometimes cling to positions that defy rational explanation. It also encourages self-reflection, prompting participants to ask whether their stance emerges from genuine conviction or unacknowledged personal feelings. By gently probing these submerged motivations, groups can address potential blind spots, avoid misunderstanding, and foster deeper trust. Ultimately, the hidden self paradox underscores that our stated reasons for supporting a policy or casting a vote often only scratch the surface of our true psychology. Learning to acknowledge these shadows can help individuals and communities approach decisions with greater self-awareness, embracing not just the rational arguments but also the emotional complexities driving each person's perspective. The cosmic bubble, standing under a clear night sky, can inspire awe and insignificance at the same time, encapsulating the cosmic bubble paradox, a notion that, within our personal bubble, life's concerns feel immensely important, yet on a cosmic scale, everything seems fleeting. On a typical day, we might stress over deadlines or minor disputes, fully immersed in our worries as though they define the universe. Meanwhile, astronomers track events happening thousands of light years away, indifferent to our daily dramas. This mismatch of scale highlights how our immediate reality can feel all-consuming, even as cosmic forces continue to unfold without our notice or involvement. In everyday life, the tension between these perspectives can surface when we step back to view our challenges from a broader lens, momentarily questioning the weight we place on routine concerns. During group decisions or voting, the cosmic bubble paradox prompts us to consider whether our intense debates might look trivial in a grander scheme, or whether they hold genuine significance for our collective well-being. On one hand, keeping a cosmic perspective can mitigate stress, reminding us that our worst fears might be minor in the span of centuries or millennia. On the other hand, this viewpoint might also dampen motivation, implying that if everything is short-lived, maybe no cause truly matters in the long run. Recognizing this paradox can help communities strike a balance. While it's valuable to maintain a sense of perspective, it's equally important to engage wholeheartedly with the here and now, given that our immediate context is where we actually live and collaborate. By honoring the vastness of existence without discarding the importance of local, shared realities, groups can encourage thoughtful, purposeful debates. Ultimately, the cosmic bubble paradox asks us to acknowledge that our decisions, while tiny in a cosmic sense, can still be monumental within our own sphere of influence, urging us to act with compassion and responsibility toward one another even as we keep the stars in view. The neural construct, waking up feeling irritable and then wondering if you've always been so short-tempered, captures a sliver of the neural construct paradox, which reveals how our self-image is intricately tied to neural processes. Each thought, emotion, or identity marker arises from countless neurons firing in response to stimuli, internal or external. From the rush of adrenaline in an emergency to the calm of a serene walk, these changes in brain chemistry can make us behave in ways that feel authentic yet are largely orchestrated by biology. Over time, certain neural pathways deepen with repetition, like practicing a musical instrument, ultimately shaping the traits we consider part of our personality. In day-to-day life, this can explain abrupt mood swings or unexpected preferences, often triggered by hormonal fluctuations, stress levels, or even the gut microbiome's subtle influence. Within group decision-making or voting, the neural construct paradox reminds us that what appears to be a purely rational process may, in fact, be guided by these fluctuating brain states. A participant might offer a compelling argument, but only because they're feeling particularly optimistic or energized at that moment. Likewise, someone feeling anxious could reject innovative ideas out of heightened caution, regardless of the concept's actual merits. Recognizing these underlying biological factors does not invalidate personal responsibility, it simply underscores that free will is never as absolute as we like to think. Groups can use this insight by scheduling important decisions at times when participants are well-rested and less prone to cognitive biases, or by allowing reflection periods so individuals can revisit choices when their neural state has stabilized. Ultimately, the neural construct paradox highlights the complexity of the human mind, suggesting that our cherished sense of self, including the beliefs and opinions we champion, is often inseparable from the subtle workings of our brain. Embracing this awareness can lead to more empathetic interactions and carefully structured group processes that account for our innate biological rhythms and cognitive limits. The temporal mirage. Few things feel as undeniably real as this moment right now. Yet the temporal mirage paradox shows that what we call the present is heavily shaped by memories of the past and projections of the future. A lively conversation might trigger recollections of similar talks years ago, subtly coloring the tone of the current exchange, while your anticipation of tomorrow's challenges can cast an anxious shadow over today's decisions. It's as if each new now arrives already tinted by what came before and what might lie ahead, making our notion of a purely present moment somewhat illusory. Think about how a simple meal can evoke nostalgia if it reminds you of childhood gatherings, or stress if you're dining with the knowledge of a big deadline looming. In group settings, this paradox is highly relevant, Voters might support a candidate out of longing for a seemingly better past era or because they're dreaming of a future that candidate promises to deliver. These time-based biases shape collective outcomes more than we often realize. Understanding the temporal mirage can help groups identify why certain ideas resonate so strongly. They either tap into cherished memories or promise relief from current or future worries. It also emphasizes that disagreements might not solely be about the facts at hand, but about how individuals interpret the present through the lens of their unique timelines. By acknowledging that no one truly experiences a moment in isolation from their personal history or expectations, participants can approach deliberations with more curiosity and less frustration when opinions clash. Ultimately, the temporal mirage paradox encourages both individuals and communities to consider how time-based emotions and beliefs merge into each new moment. Recognizing this hidden influence can lead to fairer, more empathetic decisions, reminding us that the now we cling to is rarely as simple or objective as it first appears. The analyzed identity, frequent self-reflection can be a double-edged sword, as exploring the layers of who we are sometimes creates more confusion than clarity, a dilemma at the heart of the analyzed identity paradox. Each question we ask about our motives or beliefs leads to new uncertainties, revealing contradictions that challenge any neat, unified self-image. The person who prides themselves on honesty might, upon introspection, spot white lies they tell for convenience or politeness. Rather than settling on a stable identity, such analysis often uncovers shifting patterns of behavior that resist tidy labeling. In everyday experiences, this paradox can show up as a nagging feeling that you don't quite know yourself as well as you thought. That uncertainty might surface when you suddenly change your preference, like switching career paths or abruptly ending a long-held hobby, leaving you to wonder which version of you is the real one. In a group setting, the analyzed identity paradox can manifest when members present confident arguments yet privately question their true stance on an issue. This underlying ambivalence might lead to wavering votes or rapidly shifting alliances, complicating the pursuit of consensus. Recognizing this paradox encourages a more compassionate view of our own inconsistencies and those of others. Instead of labeling contradictions as hypocrisy or indecisiveness, we can see them as natural outcomes of self-scrutiny. By creating an environment where participants feel comfortable expressing their doubts or evolving viewpoints, groups can navigate complex decisions with greater depth and sincerity. The analyzed identity ultimately highlights the dynamic nature of who we are. Just when we think we've pinned ourselves down, further reflection reveals new facets and unsettles old assumptions. Accepting this state of flux can promote flexibility in collective processes, reminding us that shifting identities are not necessarily a sign of unreliability but rather evidence of continuous growth. The thought experiment. Sometimes, purely hypothetical scenarios can shape our worldview more powerfully than real events, capturing the essence of the thought experiment paradox. Imagining outcomes that have never occurred, such as traveling back in time to alter a historical injustice or living in a society with radically different social norms, forces us to confront our deepest values and moral logic. A person who insists they'd always tell the truth might realize that under certain imagined circumstances, say, protecting a friend from harm, they would embrace deception without hesitation. Even though these scenarios aren't happening in reality, the mental exploration can shift how we see ourselves, challenging the boundaries of our principles. Day-to-day life often includes simpler versions of this phenomenon, like rehearsing a difficult conversation in your head before it takes place or picturing the worst-case scenario to prepare emotionally. When a group is tasked with making collective decisions, thought experiments become potent tools. Voters or committee members may test a proposed policy by envisioning its consequences in best and worst-case settings. These mental trials can unite people around a common goal, yet they can also spark disagreements if individuals picture drastically different outcomes. Recognizing the thought experiment paradox helps groups stay grounded, reminding them that while hypotheticals illuminate possible futures, they're shaped by each person's biases, fears, and hopes. The key is to balance imagination with tangible evidence, ensuring that dreamed-up scenarios don't overshadow actual data. Ultimately, this paradox underscores that contemplating what-if situations is a powerful driver of insight, revealing hidden convictions and blind spots. By encouraging open-minded exploration of hypotheticals, both individuals and communities can refine their principles and better anticipate the ripple effects of their decisions, leading to more thoughtful, adaptable choices. The fleeting reflection, even the most vivid glimpse of ourselves, can fade in an instant, revealing how transient and mutable self-perception can be, a core theme of the fleeting reflection paradox. You might briefly feel certain that you've discovered a definitive trait, like unwavering confidence, only to lose it the next day when confronted with a challenging situation. This shift is akin to catching a reflection in a rippling pond. For a moment, you see a clear image, but the water's movement quickly distorts it. In daily life, a fleeting moment of self-awareness might arise during success or failure, leaving you convinced you've unlocked a true piece of your identity, but the feeling rarely endures. In the context of group decisions, these fluctuations can lead to instability in opinions. A person who strongly champions a policy one week might suddenly pull back after a single piece of contrary information or an emotional conversation with someone who disagrees. Observers might question the individual's consistency or suspect hidden agendas, when in reality it may simply reflect the ephemeral nature of self-assurance and viewpoint. Recognizing the fleeting reflection paradox can encourage more flexibility and compassion within groups, as members learn that changes in stance aren't always superficial or manipulative, but rather a natural product of our evolving self-image. It can also reduce knee-jerk accusations of flip-flopping, opening up space for genuine growth and recalibration. Ultimately, this paradox reminds us that even our strongest convictions and self-definitions can shift unexpectedly, highlighting the importance of ongoing dialogue, open-mindedness, and room for reconsideration. By appreciating that moments of clarity are often fleeting, we become better equipped to adapt, collaborate, and find shared ground in ever-changing social landscapes. The flux of being. On some days, we feel unshakably certain about who we are, while on others, our identity can seem to morph, leaving us puzzled by our own shifts. This is the essence of the flux of being paradox. Much like the flow of a river that appears constant yet is composed of ever-changing water molecules, our sense of self is never truly static. Each new experience, whether it's a minor life event or a major turning point, adds to the evolving current. An individual might discover a latent passion after trying a new hobby or adopt a different perspective after reading a compelling book, causing their previous self-concept to transform. In normal routines, these changes might be subtle, like realizing you now enjoy a type of food you once detested, or they can be abrupt, such as drastically altering career goals after a significant epiphany. In group settings, the flux of being poses a challenge to collective decision-making. Positions that seemed rock-solid can suddenly shift if enough members undergo personal evolutions at around the same time. It may appear as though the group's values have changed overnight, when, in truth, the individual's inner currents have been steadily reshaping for weeks or months. Recognizing this paradox encourages patience and open communication, giving space for members to articulate their changing viewpoints without fear of judgment. By viewing identity as fluid rather than fixed, groups become more resilient, adapting policies or strategies in response to genuine transformations rather than forcing members to maintain outdated stances. Ultimately, the flux of being paradox reminds us that our personal evolution never truly ends, and that acknowledging this continuity of change can foster deeper understanding and cohesion in any collective setting. Understanding that who we are today may not fully align with who we'll be tomorrow allows for more nuanced, forward-thinking discussions and decisions. The echo chamber of thought. Life can feel eerily self-reinforcing when every opinion and belief we voice is echoed back to us, which captures the essence of the echo chamber of thought. Rather than challenging our views, certain environments, both online and off, amplify whatever we already think, making it tougher to distinguish personal conviction from collective reinforcement. A person scrolling through a social media feed curated by algorithms that highlight like-minded content may start to believe their stance is the only sensible one, unaware that contradictory information is systematically filtered out. Over time, this self-reinforcing cycle can create a closed loop where doubt or open-minded exploration seems unnecessary, because every headline and comment section nods in agreement with our perspective. In everyday interactions, this can manifest in friend groups or workplaces where dissenting voices remain silent for fear of disrupting harmony, allowing dominant viewpoints to persist unchallenged. When it comes to group decision-making or voting, the echo chamber of thought can severely limit the scope of debate. A policy might pass not because it's objectively the best solution, but because critics are drowned out or have withdrawn from the conversation altogether. Recognizing this paradox involves acknowledging that our beliefs might feel validated less by their inherent merit and more by the volume of agreement surrounding us. To break free of the echo chamber, we can proactively seek out alternative viewpoints, stay curious about conflicting evidence, and foster spaces that welcome constructive disagreement. Ultimately, understanding this paradox is vital for ensuring that group decisions reflect genuine dialogue rather than the amplified repetition of a single worldview, reminding us that robust deliberation often emerges from encountering perspectives that challenge our own. The placeholder identity. There are times when we cling to an identity simply because it fills a void or helps us navigate social situations, rather than reflecting a deeply held sense of self. The placeholder identity paradox suggests that much of what we call personality or belief may function more like a convenient stand-in for deeper truths we haven't fully discovered. Think of the way someone might label themselves the sporty one or the planner in a group, adopting that role because it's easier to define who they are by a single, recognizable trait. Even political affiliations or lifestyle choices can turn into placeholders, with individuals echoing the rhetoric of a given label without ever doing the inner work of assessing whether it truly represents them. This phenomenon is often reinforced by social expectations or professional environments that value consistency over exploration. In group decision-making or voting contexts, placeholder identities can be particularly influential. A person might vote in line with a party's platform, not because they've weighed each policy carefully, but because that affiliation has become the default setting for how they see themselves. Over time, this can homogenize collective outcomes, silencing the nuanced or evolving views people might hold if they felt freer to question their accepted role. Recognizing the placeholder identity paradox involves acknowledging the possibility that our publicly stated identities may not always capture our genuine, fluid positions. By creating an environment where it's safe to revise or abandon labels, groups can open the door to more authentic decision-making. Ultimately, this paradox reminds us that identities we assume out of habit or social convenience may require re-examination, ensuring that what we bring to the table truly reflects who we are and not just what's expected of us. The defined by negation. So much of who we think we are comes from contrasting ourselves with what we are not, which encapsulates the defined by negation paradox. Instead of identifying our core traits or values independently, we often highlight what we oppose or dislike. I don't eat meat. I'm not into that genre of music. Or, I refuse to be part of that social circle, as a way of carving out an identity. This method of self-definition can be practical, but it also carries the risk of becoming narrow or reactionary. Rather than fully exploring our own positive attributes, we might build an entire persona around negations, inadvertently stunting our growth and boxing ourselves into opposition-based worldviews. In everyday situations, this paradox can manifest when someone's sense of self revolves around rejecting familial or societal norms, only to realize they're still shaped by those norms, albeit in reverse. During group decisions or voting, the defined by negation paradox might prompt participants to form alliances based on common antagonisms rather than shared constructive goals. A coalition could arise out of a mutual dislike for a certain policy or leader, leading the group to coalesce around what it rejects instead of proactively shaping a cohesive vision of what it supports. Recognizing this tendency can illuminate why some collective choices feel scattered or incomplete, as the consensus formed against something might not translate into a robust plan for moving forward. Ultimately, this paradox underscores the importance of seeking more than just what we stand against, whether as individuals or groups, if we wish to develop an identity or policy platform that is both rooted in positive principles and capable of genuine creativity and progress. The ephemeral flicker, a momentary flash of insight, can make us feel as though we've grasped some enduring truth about ourselves, yet that bright clarity often fades as quickly as it appeared, revealing the ephemeral flicker paradox. Self-discovery rarely follows a neat trajectory. Instead, our inner life may be defined by brief epiphanies that enlighten us one moment and evaporate the next. Consider the times you've resolved to adopt a new habit after a sudden realization, like deciding to speak more kindly to a loved one or to quit procrastinating, only to watch that resolution slip away within days or even hours. These brief flickers of determination illuminate genuine desires for change but seldom endure against the tide of routine and ingrained patterns. In the context of group decisions, an ephemeral flicker can appear when a compelling speaker or persuasive data point briefly unites everyone around a bold new direction. Just as quickly, that enthusiasm can wane when practical realities or emotional comfort zones reassert themselves. The paradox doesn't mean such moments of clarity are worthless. In fact, they often represent glimpses of our most authentic motivations. The challenge lies in anchoring those insights before they slip back into the ebb and flow of daily life. Recognizing the ephemeral flicker paradox encourages both individuals and groups to create structures, like check-ins or follow-up sessions, that help sustain newfound convictions. Whether it's personal growth or collective action, transforming a fleeting revelation into lasting change requires consistent reinforcement and support. Ultimately, this paradox reminds us that self-awareness and unity can emerge in flashes, but turning those sparks into enduring flames demands more than a single burst of inspiration. By preparing for the fade and planning ways to maintain momentum, we stand a better chance of turning bright but brief epiphanies into sustained transformation. The metaphysical riddle. Sometimes our quest to define the self leads us into conceptual territory that feels more mysterious than concrete, highlighting the metaphysical riddle paradox. Identity seems tied to something intangible, soul, spirit, or essence, that defies straightforward explanation. Philosophers and spiritual traditions have long debated whether this elusive core exists independently of our body and mind, yet consensus remains out of reach. In daily life, the sense that there's something beyond mere biology might arise when we experience intense awe, deep empathy, or unshakable intuition about who we are and what matters. Despite scientific advances that explain much of our behavior in terms of genetics or neural processes, many people still harbor a feeling that an unseen dimension contributes to our individuality. In group or community decisions, the metaphysical riddle paradox can emerge when moral or existential questions come into play. Debates about justice, human dignity, or the afterlife often hinge on assumptions about a deeper nature that transcends physical form. Because these beliefs are profoundly personal and resistant to empirical testing, they can both unite individuals who share similar convictions and create sharp divisions among those with differing philosophies. Recognizing this paradox doesn't force anyone to dismiss their metaphysical beliefs. Rather, it encourages an atmosphere of respectful curiosity. By acknowledging that certain dimensions of identity may always remain open-ended mysteries, groups can approach moral or policy-based dilemmas with humility and a willingness to consider diverse viewpoints. Ultimately, the metaphysical riddle reminds us that while we strive for clarity and consistency in defining ourselves, some aspects of our identity may forever resist precise categorization, prompting us to embrace the enigma and the diverse interpretations it inspires. The unseen observer. It's one thing to participate in life's events, but quite another to sense a silent presence inside that simply watches them unfold, pointing to the unseen observer paradox. This phenomenon describes the curious feeling that part of us is quietly observing thoughts and actions without actively intervening. When you catch yourself in the midst of an argument, for instance, you may notice a calm inner voice reflecting on the emotion and intensity, almost like a bystander assessing the situation. This paradox raises questions about the nature of consciousness. If a portion of our awareness is just watching, who is actually doing the living? In everyday experience, the unseen observer can be especially noticeable during moments of shock or clarity, where time seems to slow down, and you sense a detached vantage point evaluating your next move. Group decisions or voting contexts can highlight this paradox as well. While participants engage in debate and negotiation, an individual might internally step back to observe their own biases or strategic maneuvers, sometimes leading to a shift in perspective. The paradox arises because, although this internal watcher can foster self-awareness, it can also fuel overanalysis or hesitation. People might become so engrossed in self-observation that they struggle to act decisively. By recognizing the unseen observer, groups can encourage reflective but not paralyzing conversations. Members who are aware of their internal onlooker can share insights about biases or hidden assumptions, elevating the collective dialogue. Ultimately, this paradox reminds us that consciousness appears to function on multiple levels. While one part of us is engrossed in living, another remains an onlooker, an aspect of self that, if harnessed mindfully, can guide more balanced and insightful personal and group decisions. The process over being, navigating daily life often feels like stepping into a pre-established role, parent, employee, community leader, yet beneath these labels is the process over being paradox. We are never static entities but rather ever-evolving flows of change. Think of the countless ways you've already transformed over the years, shifting interests, updated opinions, even physical changes, and how those transformations continue, often without your explicit notice. Rather than viewing ourselves as finished products, this perspective suggests we are better understood as processes, constantly adapting to new circumstances, learning from mistakes, and synthesizing fresh experiences. In a practical sense, this dynamic nature is apparent when someone moves to a new city and finds that, rather than losing their identity, they enrich it with new cultural insights and personal growth. Group decisions or voting scenarios likewise reflect this paradox. Each person carries a history of changing stances that can shift again with the introduction of compelling arguments or emerging data. Even a stable coalition might evolve over time, as its members reevaluate priorities and gather new experiences. Recognizing the process over being paradox can reduce the rigidity sometimes found in group deliberations, where participants cling to labels like pro-business or environmentalist as though they are permanent identities. By embracing the idea that beliefs and priorities can justifiably evolve, decision-making becomes more fluid and adaptive, accommodating nuanced shifts rather than labeling them as betrayals of principle. Ultimately, this paradox underscores that life is an ongoing journey of transformation. Instead of seeking a fixed self or static group consensus, we can appreciate personal and collective identities as ever-developing processes, open to reinvention, recalibration, and deeper understanding as time moves forward. The illusion of free will. A creeping doubt sometimes arises that the decisions we take pride in making consciously might, in fact, be predetermined by hidden influences. This doubt is central to the illusion of free will paradox. While most of us experience ourselves as autonomous agents, neuroscientific studies have shown that the brain often begins processing actions before we become consciously aware of them. Environmental and genetic factors can also steer us far more than we recognize, from the neighborhoods we grow up in to the chemical balances in our bodies. This interplay raises unsettling questions. If so many subconscious elements shape our choices, to what extent are we genuinely in control of our own fate? Day-to-day examples are plentiful. A craving for a particular food might be traced back to childhood associations or even the activity of gut microbes, all of which sidestep our deliberate intentions. In group decision-making and voting, the illusion of free will paradox suggests that collective outcomes might reflect underlying societal structures, like economic or cultural pressures, just as much as rational debate. People often believe they're objectively choosing a candidate or policy, when in reality they may be heavily influenced by long-standing allegiances, marketing campaigns, or emotional triggers they've absorbed unconsciously over time. Recognizing this paradox doesn't necessarily negate personal responsibility, but it encourages a more humble view of our autonomy. Rather than assuming full control, we can acknowledge the myriad forces that nudge us in certain directions. By understanding and discussing these influences in group settings, whether social norms, psychological biases, or media shaping our perceptions, we can aim for a more transparent, equitable decision-making process. Ultimately, the illusion of free will invites us to strike a balance between accepting that we are not wholly independent and believing that our efforts to think critically and act ethically still matter. The uncertainty principle. We crave definite answers about who we are and what we believe, but the uncertainty principle paradox suggests that absolute clarity may remain forever out of reach. On any given day, even the most self-assured individual can encounter moments of doubt. Am I on the right path? Do I really value this cause? Is my viewpoint well-founded or a result of bias? Each new piece of information or interaction can prompt a re-evaluation, revealing that a sense of certainty about our identity or stance is often fleeting. Just as in quantum physics, where observing a particle can alter its state, our attempts to pin down identity or belief can influence how we see ourselves, making the very act of seeking certainty part of what makes it elusive. On a mundane level, you might change your mind about a career, discover new facets of your personality in unexpected situations, or oscillate between contrasting viewpoints on social issues. In group decisions or voting, the uncertainty principle can manifest when members initially agree on a plan, then become hesitant when fresh insights arise or contradictions surface. Recognizing this paradox encourages an atmosphere of openness and continuous inquiry, instead of treating a single decision as the final word. It also promotes tolerance for others who may appear indecisive but are genuinely wrestling with conflicting evidence and perspectives. While it might feel unsettling, embracing uncertainty can sharpen critical thinking and facilitate more adaptive, thoughtful choices. Ultimately, the uncertainty principle reminds us that personal and collective convictions aren't static achievements but ongoing explorations. Rather than viewing doubt as a weakness, we can consider it a catalyst for deeper understanding and a safeguard against complacency in both our personal growth and shared deliberations. The merging flow, the concept of self, often hinges on drawing lines between ourselves and others. Yet the merging flow paradox challenges those boundaries by pointing to the interconnectedness of our experiences. A sense of unity can sometimes break through the usual distinctions, be it in moments of collective joy at a concert, spiritual gatherings where people feel they share one consciousness, or even a team working so harmoniously that individual egos seem to dissolve. In these flashes of unity, the I can recede, replaced by a profound sensation of belonging to a larger whole. Everyday life occasionally hints at this merging when empathy overtakes us, like feeling a friend's grief as if it were our own, or when cultural events unite diverse crowds around a single cause. From a group decision-making perspective, the merging flow paradox becomes evident in scenarios where communal synergy eclipses personal agendas. People might find themselves championing solutions that benefit the collective without any explicit calculation of self-interest, experiencing a sense of shared purpose rather than fragmented individual concerns. While such unity can breed innovative, altruistic outcomes, it also carries risks if the collective momentum overrides critical thinking. Recognizing this paradox can help groups strike a balance, encouraging a spirit of collaboration without sacrificing the healthy diversity of viewpoints. It also reminds us that the separation between individual and group identities can be fluid, shaped by empathy, shared experiences, and mutual goals. Ultimately, the merging flow paradox reveals both the power and vulnerability of collective unity, demonstrating how boundaries we hold as self-evident can blur under the right conditions, leading to decisions and votes that resonate with a sense of larger interconnected purpose. The void of certainty, moments of existential reflection can leave us staring into an unsettling realization. Many of the most cherished truths or identities we cling to may not be as solid as we assume, a state encapsulated by the void of certainty paradox. Whether it's your profession, your moral code, or your belief in human nature, each element that feels like a foundational block can be called into question by new information, shifting life circumstances, or inner doubt. Imagine someone who's built their entire sense of worth around career success, only to face sudden job loss. The ensuing crisis might highlight how what felt like a bedrock was actually dependent on external factors beyond personal control. In everyday life, that void can appear when you realize your political stance was heavily shaped by family tradition, or when a personal betrayal challenges your trust in human decency. During group decision-making or voting processes, the void of certainty paradox can lead to abrupt recalibrations if the group collectively recognizes that the assumptions guiding their choices are no longer valid. A dramatic economic downturn, a social uprising, or a breakthrough in research might puncture a once stable consensus, leaving everyone grappling with a new reality. Acknowledging this paradox can foster resilience by encouraging flexibility and a willingness to admit that previously held truths may not always hold. While it may feel uncomfortable to operate without rigid anchors, doing so can also pave the way for more innovative thinking and deeper collaboration, as group members learn to question dogma and stay open to emerging evidence. Ultimately, the void of certainty paradox serves as a reminder that clinging too tightly to any one viewpoint or identity can be precarious. By allowing space for doubt and evolution, individuals and communities can navigate changes more adaptively, discovering fresh insights that weren't visible behind the veil of assumed permanence. The self-designer, sometimes it feels as though we are the architects of our own identity, picking and choosing traits and values in a manner reminiscent of curating a personal brand. The self-designer paradox explores how much of our inner truth might actually be deliberate construction rather than the organic unfolding we often assume it to be. A person might adopt a minimalistic lifestyle not purely out of innate preference but because they admire influencers who champion simplicity, seamlessly weaving those adopted choices into their self-image. Similarly, choosing a certain career path could be motivated more by aspiration and social pressures than by a preordained calling. While it's liberating to see ourselves as capable of self-invention, there's a flip side: how much of that self-design is genuinely ours, and how much is a reaction to external trends or expectations. In group contexts like voting or policy discussions, self-design surfaces when individuals align with stances they believe reflect the person they want to be, often driven by brand-like signals such as championing environmentally friendly initiatives to appear conscientious, or backing progressive policies to fit a modern, forward-thinking image. This can be beneficial if it propels positive actions, but it might also mask deeper uncertainties or overshadow personal reservations. Recognizing the self-designer paradox prompts reflection on whether our choices originate from thoughtful introspection or a desire to curate our identity for social validation. It encourages a more transparent process in group decisions, where participants can acknowledge the role of self-fashioning in shaping their stances. Ultimately, the paradox underscores the complexity of free will. While we can choose to become the architects of our identity, external influences, ranging from cultural icons to peer approval, are frequently woven into our plans. By being mindful of these influences, we can strive for greater authenticity, ensuring our self-designed paths resonate with our deeper values rather than just the personas we aspire to project. The unseen forces, throughout life, invisible currents appear to steer our choices, hinting at the unseen forces paradox, the notion that our decisions may be guided by factors we scarcely realize exist. On any ordinary day, you might find yourself drawn to a particular cafe without fully recognizing that a subtle emotional association, a past memory, or even a catchy jingle heard earlier in the morning influenced your preference. Upbringing and media messages operate like background scripts, quietly shaping our desires and biases. As people engage in group decisions or voting, these hidden elements become magnified. A charismatic speaker might tap into subconscious yearnings, shifting an entire crowd's opinion more effectively than any rational argument could. Economic structures, can coerce individuals into choices that seem voluntary on the surface but are practically predetermined by limited options. Recognizing the presence of unseen forces doesn't absolve us of responsibility. Rather, it pushes us to be more introspective about where our motivations arise. In group settings, acknowledging these forces fosters a healthier debate climate, where participants examine not only surface arguments but also the emotional and cultural underpinnings that guide them. It's an invitation to ask, why do I feel so strongly about this? Or, who might be benefiting from my viewpoint? Although we cannot entirely escape these unseen influences, bringing them into the light can reduce their sway and lead to decisions grounded in a more conscious, collective understanding. Ultimately, the unseen forces paradox reminds us that genuine autonomy and democracy require actively questioning the hidden currents shaping our convictions, ensuring that our votes and judgments reflect thoughtful self-awareness rather than unconscious conditioning. The echo of thought, even the simplest notion we hold, can reverberate in our minds long after it's first formed, illustrating the echo of thought paradox. Ideas don't merely appear and vanish. They can linger, subtly influencing subsequent thinking in ways we might not immediately notice. Perhaps you read a compelling statistic that nudged you toward a specific viewpoint. Over time, the memory of that data may fade, but the tilt it created in your beliefs remains. In mundane routines, this echo might manifest when an offhand remark heard at work slowly evolves into a recurring mental refrain, shaping how you interpret future conversations. In collective contexts, like voting or policymaking, these echoes accumulate across many individuals. A soundbite from a political ad might become lodged in people's minds, guiding the direction of group dialogue even after the original statement is forgotten. Over time, repeated echoes can form an unspoken consensus, carrying the group toward a decision that feels intuitively correct yet traces back to an oft-repeated but rarely questioned premise. Recognizing the echo of thought paradox encourages both self-scrutiny and a willingness to revisit foundational assumptions. Rather than letting half-remembered data or persuasive phrases guide decisions, communities can benefit from consistently returning to sources and re-evaluating truths. This approach helps ensure that the chorus of internal echoes doesn't drown out fresh perspectives or newly emerged evidence. Ultimately, the paradox underscores the tenacity of ideas within our mental landscapes, reminding us that the mind can be its own echo chamber if we never pause to verify what we've internalized. By examining these lingering refrains, we enhance the clarity and integrity of both our individual beliefs and the collective choices that arise from them. The scattered narrative. Personal histories are often recounted as if each experience flows seamlessly into the next. Yet the scattered narrative paradox proposes that our life stories may be better understood as a disjointed collection of anecdotes we rearrange to make sense of who we are. Think about the times you've shared your life story with someone new. You likely highlighted the events that support the persona you wish to present, omitting or glossing over episodes that don't fit the narrative. As circumstances change, you might start telling a different version of your story, re-emphasizing certain details and discarding others. This selective process can lead to multiple, sometimes contradictory, narratives existing simultaneously in your mind. In everyday contexts, shifting from one social circle to another can reveal how each group hears a slightly altered tale of your background and values. When brought into group decision-making or voting, the scattered narrative paradox means that participants often approach issues armed with a patchwork of personal tales they interpret as consistent, even if these stories change drastically depending on context. Someone might champion a policy one day, referencing a specific incident from their past, and then switch positions after recalling a different anecdote that contradicts their initial stance. Recognizing this paradox encourages a more flexible mindset, acknowledging that our personal histories are not necessarily objective truths but living stories shaped by current concerns. Rather than accusing someone of inconsistency, group members can appreciate that memory and identity are fluid, open to reinterpretation as new insights emerge. Ultimately, the scattered narrative paradox reminds us that we construct our identities through selective storytelling, and that these shifting recollections can significantly influence the beliefs we carry into collective discussions. The distorted lens. At times, it feels like we see reality as it is. Yet the distorted lens paradox insists that all perception is filtered through personal biases, emotional states, and cultural conditioning. Much like wearing tinted glasses that subtly alter colors without our conscious awareness, we often navigate the world believing our viewpoint is neutral. Someone, for instance, might assume they are making a purely logical choice, not realizing how deeply childhood experiences or persistent self-doubt color their assessment of a situation. Over time, these filters can create blind spots, areas where we overlook crucial information or misinterpret others' intentions because our mental lens warps incoming signals. When scaled up to group dynamics, the distorted lens paradox becomes evident in polarizing debates or voting behaviors. Two factions looking at the same data can arrive at vastly different conclusions, each convinced they're relying on objective fact. The tension often stems not from who possesses the real truth, but from the hidden perceptual filters each side employs. Recognizing the distorted lens doesn't mean declaring that all truths are equally subjective. Rather, it encourages vigilance in questioning our assumptions and empathizing with others' viewpoints. In a collective setting, openly discussing the variety of perspectives allows the group to piece together a fuller picture, reducing the risk of major oversights. Ultimately, this paradox emphasizes the importance of continual self-examination and a willingness to incorporate alternative viewpoints. Only by acknowledging that every one of us sees through some distortion can we strive for decisions that are informed by a more comprehensive view of reality. The perpetual riddle. We sometimes hope that deeper introspection will finally solve the puzzle of selfhood, yet the perpetual riddle paradox argues that no matter how thoroughly we analyze ourselves, new questions will invariably arise. The harder we look for our core identity, the more elusive it becomes. You might begin by defining yourself through career or relationships, then discover that as those aspects shift, your definition no longer holds. Even values we consider fundamental can evolve under changing life circumstances, leaving us puzzled about whether we've betrayed our true self or grown into a different one. This open-ended searching can be exhilarating or disheartening, depending on our capacity to cope with uncertainty. In collective decision-making or voting, the perpetual riddle appears when members wrestle with the group's identity. A community may pride itself on being progressive, inclusive, or tradition-bound, only to confront scenarios that challenge those very ideals. With every new challenge comes a deeper set of contradictions and inquiries about what the group stands for, leading to redefinitions that can temporarily unsettle shared confidence. Recognizing this paradox encourages an environment where ongoing questioning is normalized rather than viewed as a crisis of unity. By embracing the idea that both individual and group identities are in continuous flux, participants can navigate transitions more gracefully, seeing them as part of a natural process rather than a failing. Ultimately, the perpetual riddle paradox teaches us that seeking a final, unchanging answer to "Who am I?" or "Who are we?" may be futile. Instead, we can find meaning in the continual exploration, treating each layer of self-discovery or communal redefinition as an opportunity for growth rather than a problem to be fixed once and for all. The dual role. On any given day, we juggle multiple facets of our personalities, revealing the dual role paradox. We are both participants in life's drama and observers critiquing our performance. This duality can be starkly evident when you catch yourself adopting a certain demeanor at work, professional, assertive, only to become a different version of yourself around old friends. There's nothing inherently deceptive about this shift. It arises from context and ingrained social cues. Yet it can spark dissonance if we feel we're not being true to ourselves, prompting questions about which version is the real one. In group decisions or voting contexts, the dual role paradox can lead participants to voice opinions that align with the group's atmosphere while privately harboring doubts. An individual might agree with the majority to maintain harmony, even as a more skeptical inner voice critiques each point. This interplay may be beneficial at times, allowing us to function smoothly in social structures. But it can also stifle genuine debate if people feel compelled to silence their private assessments. Recognizing the dual role can encourage a healthier balance. By granting ourselves permission to reconcile the difference between outer behavior and inner reflection, we may find more authentic ways to communicate. It also helps group members be mindful that a colleague's outward agreement might not always match their internal stance, suggesting a need for open-ended questions and safe spaces for dissent. Ultimately, this paradox highlights that authenticity often involves navigating these dual roles consciously rather than denying their coexistence. Accepting both the actor and the observer within us can enrich personal integrity and foster a collective environment that welcomes diverse, sometimes conflicting layers of thought. The self-negating claim. Occasionally, the act of defining ourselves undercuts the very concept we're trying to uphold. This puzzling scenario is at the core of the self-negating claim paradox. For instance, someone who proudly declares, "I'm the most humble person here," immediately contradicts the notion of humility. Or an individual who insists they are entirely open-minded yet refuses to entertain any viewpoint that challenges their worldview. By proclaiming a virtue that inherently depends on unself-conscious behavior or perspective, we land in a logical bind. In everyday life, such contradictions may creep in when we try to cultivate an identity around traits like generosity, patience, or altruism, then fixate on demonstrating those traits so overtly that we lose their essence. In group decision-making or voting, the self-negating claim paradox becomes relevant if an organization claims to champion transparency while stifling debate behind closed doors. Another example could be a community promoting tolerance but showing little tolerance for those who question its core beliefs. Recognizing this paradox calls for ongoing self-checks, both individually and collectively. Do our actions truly reflect the ideals we claim to embody, or are we caught up in the performance of those ideals? By acknowledging the tension, we can strive for authenticity instead of falling into the trap of self-contradiction. Groups that integrate regular reviews of their stated values and actual practices stand a better chance of minimizing hypocrisy. Ultimately, the self-negating claim paradox reminds us that certain qualities resist direct assertion and thrive more in their unspoken embodiment. Staying mindful of the gap between speech and action can guide both personal integrity and collective authenticity, ensuring that what we claim to uphold is more than just a performance of virtue. The fleeting witness. Even as we immerse ourselves in the flow of life, a subtle part of our consciousness stands back, briefly observing moments like a spectator who appears and disappears in an instant, embodying the fleeting witness paradox. Whether we're engaging in a heated argument, laughing with friends, or rushing to meet a deadline, there can be sudden flashes of detachment where we notice our own reactions almost as if they belong to someone else. This feeling might vanish as quickly as it arrives, leaving us to question whether it really happened or was just a trick of the mind. Unlike more persistent forms of self-awareness, the fleeting witness is ephemeral, a transient observer that reveals itself randomly or under stress, then fades back into the background. In group settings, the paradox can surface during decisive moments, like casting a crucial vote or delivering a final verdict. When a participant momentarily feels detached from their role, watching the decision unfold as if from an external vantage point. This phenomenon can either provide a refreshing sense of perspective, helping individuals spot biases or emotional overreactions, or introduce self-doubt by highlighting how arbitrary one's position might be. Recognizing the fleeting witness paradox suggests the importance of pausing to harness these brief flashes of clarity. Rather than dismissing them as mere distractions, we can treat them as valuable checkpoints for reevaluating our motives and assumptions. On a collective level, groups that allow space for reflection, perhaps a moment of silence or a designated period for reconsideration, can leverage this sudden vantage point, ensuring decisions are made with a deeper awareness of both personal and communal contexts. Ultimately, the fleeting witness reminds us that the boundary between participation and observation is not fixed, and that fleeting glimpses of detachment can offer powerful insights when shaping our shared future. The drifting identity. Even the most resolute sense of self can shift over time, raising the notion of the drifting identity paradox. You might notice this in small ways when a long-held interest, like a favorite sport or hobby, gradually loses its appeal, making room for a surprising new passion. Viewed up close, these changes feel minute, but seen over years, they reveal just how much we can evolve. It's easy to assume we're the same person from one milestone to the next, yet daily experiences subtly reshape our perspectives, goals, and emotional responses. Perhaps you once believed wholeheartedly in a particular cause, only to find your conviction waning as you encountered different viewpoints or personal challenges. Each shift redefines how you see yourself, often leaving you to wonder if your core has changed or if you're simply uncovering layers that were always there. In collective decision-making, like when a community votes on a significant policy, this drift can disrupt group cohesion. People who used to share common ground may discover their values diverging after various life events or new information. The sudden realization that a friend or colleague no longer holds the same stance can create tension, sometimes leading to accusations of inconsistency or betrayal. Yet, the drifting identity paradox reminds us that these transformations are a natural outcome of ongoing growth. It also suggests that consensus reached at one point may not remain stable unless there's room for continuous reevaluation. Rather than viewing changing positions as a flaw, groups can adapt by acknowledging that each member's identity is in perpetual motion, shaped by evolving circumstances and insights. This mindset opens the door to more flexible, empathetic discussions, where shifts in perspective are met with curiosity rather than immediate judgment. Ultimately, the drifting identity paradox highlights that no individual is fixed in place. By recognizing this fluidity in ourselves and others, we become more prepared to navigate the complexities of personal development and group dynamics. Embracing the idea that change is ongoing can foster stronger, more adaptable communities, where growth and transformation are seen as valid parts of collective progress rather than obstacles to unity. The illusory aggregate. At first glance, it may seem straightforward to sum up who we are by listing traits, achievements, and memories, yet the illusory aggregate paradox suggests that these components don't necessarily add up to a cohesive whole. Much like a collage, each piece of our identity reflects different moments and influences, but it can be misleading to assume that combining them reveals an essential self. One might be ambitious at work but laid back among friends, generous with some people and guarded with others, all without feeling a sense of contradiction. These variations can be genuine facets of one's identity, coexisting without neatly merging into a single, uniform personality. Over time, however, the human mind creates a sense of continuity by stitching these fragments together into a personal narrative that may gloss over the complexity beneath. In collaborative settings, particularly when a team or group attempts to gauge a member's reliability or beliefs, this paradox can lead to confusion. A colleague might appear extremely detail-oriented during project planning but surprisingly casual about meeting deadlines, leaving others unsure of which version is the real one. It might be tempting to assume there's some hidden, stable core that explains these differences, but the illusory aggregate paradox implies that we may be interpreting natural inconsistencies as perplexing contradictions. Acknowledging that individuals can hold multiple, sometimes competing traits offers a more nuanced view, reducing the urge to label someone as contradictory or inconsistent. As groups deliberate on decisions or cast votes, it helps to remember that each person brings a mosaic of perspectives and qualities, not all of which align in any obvious way. By accepting that no single summary can capture the entirety of who we are, groups can move beyond simplistic categorizations and learn to appreciate the multifaceted nature of each participant's contributions. This recognition fosters a culture of deeper listening and empathy, enabling a collaborative process that values the varied fragments each member brings to the table. Ultimately, the illusory aggregate paradox reminds us that the sum of our parts may not form a tidy portrait, but acknowledging that reality allows for a more flexible, compassionate understanding of both individual identities and collective goals. The mechanical choice. On days when our decisions feel almost automated, The mechanical choice paradox comes into play, questioning how much of our behavior is the result of conscious deliberation rather than reflexive, scripted patterns. Think about how many daily activities unfold on autopilot, selecting the same coffee order, walking the same route to work, or responding to emails with routine phrasing. Each of these actions might seem trivial, but they reveal how easily habit and environment can direct us. Even major life choices, like opting for a particular career or aligning with a political party, can stem more from ingrained norms than from introspective evaluation. Over time, this raises the unsettling possibility that we might live large portions of our lives following preset scripts, only occasionally pausing to question why. In group decision-making contexts, the mechanical choice paradox can lead participants to vote in familiar patterns, supporting propositions that mirror established norms within their social or professional circle. Such behavior can look like loyalty or consistency, but it may also indicate an unexamined path. A workplace might, for example, rely on outdated procedures simply because they're ingrained habits rather than a deliberate choice. Recognizing this paradox doesn't mean dismissing all routines. Habits can be stabilizing and efficient. The challenge is determining when mechanical behavior obstructs genuine progress or masks deeper preferences. Groups that address this paradox actively encourage members to reevaluate their usual decisions, offering prompts like, "Is there another way?" or "Are we assuming something without testing it?" This approach can break the cycle of automatic responses, sparking innovation and revealing unexpected points of agreement or difference. Ultimately, the mechanical choice paradox serves as a reminder that not every action stems from thoughtful reflection. By acknowledging how routine and environment can shape choices, individuals and communities gain the chance to redefine their trajectories in more purposeful ways. Such mindfulness can reinvigorate personal growth, reduce group stagnation, and foster decisions that truly reflect collective values instead of mere repetition. While no one can, or should, analyze every decision in painstaking detail, periodically questioning whether we're acting out of habit or authentic conviction can help ensure that our lives and votes have genuine intention behind them. The splintered perspective. It's common to assume that we see the world through a single, unified lens, but the splintered perspective paradox proposes that our viewpoint may be fragmented across different contexts. You might consider yourself decisive at work yet find it incredibly hard to choose a dish on a restaurant menu. Or perhaps you're nurturing and patient with close friends but surprisingly curt with strangers who need help. These inconsistencies can feel bewildering, but they highlight the extent to which our perceptions and behaviors shift according to setting and social cues. Instead of one overarching worldview, we might possess multiple partial lenses that we swap out depending on immediate circumstances, all while believing we're staying consistent. In collective decision-making environments, the splintered perspective paradox can manifest when people who seem aligned on paper diverge in practice. During a committee meeting, for instance, someone might champion open communication, then shy away from sharing crucial feedback in a follow-up email, reflecting a disjunction between how they see themselves in a group discussion versus a one-on-one context. Recognizing these splits isn't about labeling them as hypocrisy. Rather, it underscores the complexity of human psychology and how easily subtle influences can tilt our behaviors. Groups that acknowledge this phenomenon are less likely to jump to conclusions when a member's actions don't match their stated ideals. Instead, they can explore situational factors that prompted the discrepancy, finding constructive ways to address misalignments. This paradox ultimately invites a kinder approach toward ourselves and others, one that recognizes how situational context can evoke different facets of our identity. It encourages us to look beyond the surface of contradictory behaviors, offering space to examine the real-life nuances that drive them. When it comes to voting or setting policies, such understanding can enrich debate, allowing for exploration of how context-specific views might differ from general principles. The splintered perspective paradox, therefore, reminds us that identity isn't a monolithic block but a nuanced tapestry woven from shifting threads. By accepting that each person's view can be multi-layered, Communities and organizations foster an environment where healthy self-reflection and genuine empathy can thrive. The incomplete portrait. Self-descriptions tend to emphasize a handful of defining traits, yet the incomplete portrait paradox suggests that these snapshots never reveal the entire canvas. Even carefully crafted "About Me" sections fail to capture countless nuances, from our private struggles to hidden talents we barely acknowledge. It can be comforting to present a tidy collection of adjectives: optimistic, diligent, sociable, but those labels often mask the complexities that make us human. Perhaps you're known as outgoing, yet you harbor a deep-seated preference for solitude when the day's energy wears thin. Or you might pride yourself on being rational, even while an undercurrent of impulsiveness informs many day-to-day actions. Each piece of the puzzle might seem consistent on its own, but the bigger picture remains elusive because we rarely display all our qualities at once. In a group context, the incomplete portrait paradox becomes evident when people rely on superficial assessments of their peers, especially during voting or collaborative sessions. Someone designated as the numbers person might have untapped creative insights that go unnoticed because everyone focuses on their analytical skill. Another participant might be stereotyped as the emotional one, overshadowing moments when they approach issues with calm logic. Such narrow portrayals can limit an organization's potential by pigeonholing individuals into roles they've merely exhibited once or twice. Recognizing this paradox can lead teams to adopt practices that uncover hidden dimensions, such as rotating tasks, encouraging cross-training, or simply inviting every participant to share experiences that go beyond their usual headline traits. Ultimately, this paradox encourages humility in how we perceive ourselves and others. The story you tell about who you are is rarely the whole story, and it's worth remembering that people around you might contain layers they've never felt safe or inspired to reveal. By creating spaces where full expression is welcomed, even if it disrupts comfortable stereotypes, groups can foster a more genuine appreciation for the multifaceted identities that comprise their membership. The incomplete portrait paradox, then, serves as a call to question neat labels and remain open to the ongoing possibility that both self and group identities are broader and richer than any quick description can capture. The unraveling reflection. Sometimes, moments of introspection can strip away the certainty we once felt about who we are, an experience woven into the unraveling reflection paradox. It's as though each attempt to pin down a trait or belief leads to deeper questions rather than firm answers. For instance, you might label yourself a patient person until encountering a stressful situation that triggers impatience you never suspected you had. Or you've always believed you're fearless, only to discover a hidden phobia that undermines that self-assessment. This unraveling can be disconcerting, revealing that even qualities we saw as stable can suddenly come undone when confronted by new contexts. In group decision-making, the paradox becomes particularly relevant when a vote or policy choice forces participants to confront aspects of themselves they hadn't previously examined. A team member might enter discussions convinced of their openness to compromise, only to realize a deep-seated attachment to certain ideas that resists negotiation. Another might see themselves as fair-minded until the debate raises personal biases they'd never acknowledged. These encounters can unsettle a group's dynamic as people struggle to reconcile the person they thought they were with emerging revelations. Yet, this very process can also foster growth. When individuals acknowledge that parts of their self-definition might be unraveling, they become more receptive to learning and collaboration, less anchored to rigid labels they once relied on. Recognizing the unraveling reflection paradox invites a softer approach, one that views shifting or dissolving aspects of identity not as failures but as natural shifts in understanding. Groups that embrace this viewpoint can create a supportive climate where challenging truths about oneself are met with acceptance rather than defensiveness. Such a stance encourages honesty, ultimately enhancing trust and cohesion. After all, if your sense of self unravels in one area, it may be an opportunity to weave a more nuanced, adaptable identity in its place. The paradox, therefore, serves as a reminder that questioning our assumptions about ourselves, no matter how unsettling, can pave the way for deeper self-awareness and richer communal engagement. The fleeting anchor, convictions that once seemed firm can, over time, reveal themselves as mere stepping stones, illustrating the fleeting anchor paradox. You might attach yourself passionately to a principle, like the importance of self-reliance, only to find that life experiences gradually weaken your grip on it. A career setback or personal crisis could illuminate how community support or collaborative effort matters more than you'd imagined. The anchor that guided many of your decisions and shaped your identity might loosen, leaving you to drift toward other ideals. This shift can feel unsettling, especially if that core belief served as a moral or psychological lifeline in challenging times. In collective environments, the paradox often appears when group members initially unite under a powerful rallying point, maybe a slogan, mission statement, or common adversary. Over weeks or months, evolving circumstances or personal growth can render that once galvanizing anchor less compelling. People who shaped their identity around the group's credo may begin to question whether it still holds universal resonance. Such moments can generate friction, as longtime members resist the idea that an anchor they cherish is losing relevance. Yet if approached thoughtfully, the fleeting anchor paradox can spark renewed discussions that adapt the group's guiding principles to current realities. By accepting that anchors, whether personal or collective, are not fixed in perpetuity, communities can remain agile and responsive to change. This perspective also fosters empathy. Rather than viewing a shift in someone's beliefs as a betrayal or inconsistency, recognizing the paradox allows us to see it as a natural evolution. Beliefs may have been essential or appropriate at one stage of life but become less so as experiences accumulate. Ultimately, the fleeting anchor paradox underlines that no principle or worldview remains forever immune to the ebb and flow of new information, personal reflection, and communal influence. Embracing that possibility can ease the anxiety around changing or adapting cherished beliefs, paving the way for personal growth and group transformations that remain grounded yet flexible in the face of life's inevitable shifts. The contradictory self. Every so often, we catch ourselves holding two opposing views, fully convinced of both, forming what can be called the contradictory self paradox. It might appear when you're fiercely protective of your personal freedom yet simultaneously yearn for a deep sense of belonging, which often requires compromising some level of independence. Or you might champion environmental causes while delighting in activities that leave a hefty carbon footprint. These internal conflicts aren't necessarily signs of hypocrisy. They can reflect the multifaceted nature of human desires and beliefs. Life contexts and emotional triggers can activate different parts of our psyche, so we end up genuinely endorsing ideas that don't comfortably fit together under a single logical framework. In group decision-making, these contradictions frequently surface. A participant may advocate for stricter rules to maintain quality standards while also pushing for greater autonomy so individuals can innovate freely. Another might vehemently defend transparency yet prefer to handle certain delicate topics behind closed doors. Such paradoxes can frustrate team discussions, as it's challenging to align policies when each member harbors internal conflicts that mirror the group's external debates. A single person might argue passionately on both sides of an issue, confusing others who want clarity on their true stance. Recognizing the contradictory self-paradox, however, can lessen judgment and blame. It highlights that humans often operate from a tapestry of feelings and experiences, which can yield genuine but conflicting positions. By acknowledging these internal inconsistencies, groups can approach decisions with greater nuance and patience. Rather than demanding immediate resolution of contradictions, they can allow space for exploring compromises or phased approaches that respect the complexities people bring to the table. This method encourages creative problem-solving, ensuring that policies account for the natural tension between equally valid concerns. Ultimately, the contradictory self-paradox reminds us that contradictions aren't always obstacles to progress. They can be catalysts for innovative thinking and deeper understanding. We don't have to force ourselves into neat consistency at every turn. Sometimes the most robust solutions arise from grappling with the reality that we hold multiple truths at once. The illusory core, It's common to believe in a stable essence underlying our changing moods and evolving opinions, yet the illusory core paradox casts doubt on the idea of a permanent self. Over the years, our personalities can shift drastically, sometimes to the point where we hardly recognize who we used to be. A once reserved individual might become outspoken through new experiences, or a passionate activist may eventually lose interest in public protests. These transformations can make us question whether there's an unchanging foundation at all. Is there something that ties together the ambitious teen, the disillusioned adult, and the wise retiree? Or do we construct the illusion of a core to feel grounded in an unpredictable life? In collective contexts, assuming a core identity can lead to misunderstandings. A colleague might be labeled always results-driven, when in reality, they once thrived on process and exploration but adapted due to workplace demands. Over time, shifting roles and environments can blur the lines of who they truly are. During group decisions or voting, the illusory core paradox suggests that expecting unwavering stances from members overlooks the natural evolution people undergo. When someone modifies their position, the group might interpret it as flip-flopping or insincerity, without recognizing that personal growth or fresh insights spurred a genuine change of heart. Accepting this paradox entails recognizing that continuity is often a narrative we craft after the fact, stitching together memories to form a coherent story of self. For communities, this realization can foster a more welcoming atmosphere for adaptation, allowing individuals the freedom to revise past beliefs without fear of being seen as fraudulent. It also encourages an ongoing dialogue about identity, reminding us that yesterday's convictions may not define tomorrow's. Ultimately, the illusory core paradox reminds us that clinging too tightly to the notion of an unchanging essence can limit personal and collective progress. By embracing the fluidity of identity, groups can harness new perspectives, and individuals can find the courage to evolve without the burden of seeming inconsistent or disloyal to an imagined core. The filter of perception. We often trust our senses to deliver a reliable picture of the world. Yet the filter of perception paradox reveals that countless subjective factors, emotions, expectations, cultural background, shape what we see and how we interpret it. Consider two people examining the same piece of art. One might see it as profoundly moving, linked to cherished childhood memories, while the other finds it obscure or unsettling. Neither is necessarily right or wrong. They're simply experiencing the artwork through different perceptual filters. These filters are so ingrained that we usually don't realize we're wearing them, leading us to assume our viewpoint is the most direct line to truth. When it comes to group decisions or voting, this paradox becomes more complex. Each participant brings their own filter, which can cause the same set of facts or scenarios to produce vastly different conclusions. A policy that seems obviously beneficial to one person might appear detrimental or oppressive to another, based on their personal histories and worldviews. Recognizing that these filters exist can reduce the inclination to label one side as in denial or unreasonable, and instead open pathways for meaningful dialogue. By actively seeking to understand the backgrounds and biases influencing each stance, a group can move closer to bridging perceptual gaps. This realization also helps us navigate everyday disagreements with a bit more empathy. Rather than dismissing someone's opinion outright, acknowledging the filter of perception reminds us that we're all subject to unseen influences that color our interpretations. Techniques like active listening or cross-cultural exchanges can partially lift these filters, offering moments of genuine clarity. Ultimately, this paradox pushes us to accept that perception is not a simple mirror of reality but a multifaceted lens shaped by who we are and what we've experienced. While we may never fully remove these filters, becoming aware of them is the first step toward more thoughtful, inclusive decision-making, an essential ingredient for any community aiming to find common ground despite diverse viewpoints. The neural illusion. On the surface, our thoughts and feelings seem to arise from a personal, spiritual core, yet the neural illusion paradox suggests they might be more byproducts of brain processes than we care to admit. Modern science shows how neural pathways and chemical balances correlate with experiences like love, ambition, or even the sense of self. A hormonal shift can drastically change your mood, and an injury to specific brain regions can alter personality traits once deemed intrinsic. This scientific perspective challenges the notion that there's some intangible essence pulling the strings, proposing instead that identity and consciousness may be emergent properties of our nervous system's complexity. In group settings, like a corporate board analyzing employees' motivation or a local council debating social programs, this viewpoint can alter how we see accountability and choice. If personal drive and ethical stances are substantially influenced by brain chemistry, how much praise or blame should one receive for actions that society applauds or condemns? Recognizing the neural illusion paradox might spur more compassionate policies, such as supporting mental health interventions or rehabilitation efforts that acknowledge neurobiological constraints. Yet it also raises worries about diminishing individual responsibility. People might argue, "My brain made me do it," undermining the conventional approach to moral or legal accountability. Rather than declaring free will an illusion outright, this paradox nudges us to consider a more nuanced position. Our brains heavily shape our actions, but we still function within a cultural and social framework that assigns meaning to our choices. A group aware of these underpinnings might work to balance personal responsibility with support systems that account for the neurological factors influencing behavior. Ultimately, the neural illusion paradox underscores the tension between seeing ourselves as autonomous agents and acknowledging the profound impact of biology. By discussing and incorporating this tension into communal decisions, we can aim for more inclusive solutions that respect human complexity. This perspective reminds us that viewing identity and consciousness purely as a product of the brain doesn't have to strip life of purpose. It can instead cultivate empathy and informed responsibility across individuals and groups alike. The malleable essence, a rigid definition of self, seems comforting, something stable to cling to, but the malleable essence paradox proposes that our core identity might actually be pliable, shaped and reshaped by continuous feedback from our environment. The person who once despised public speaking might, after repeated exposure and supportive coaching, develop a passion for it, eventually becoming known for captivating presentations. Rather than uncovering a true, latent talent, they've altered their essence through training and experience. This phenomenon extends beyond skills to the realm of values. Someone raised with a strict moral code might, after traveling and witnessing diverse cultures, revise their ethics to accommodate more nuance. In each scenario, the shift feels genuine, suggesting our underlying nature is in constant flux rather than fixed from the start. Within group dynamics, the malleable essence paradox becomes visible when people with strongly held positions evolve after constructive dialogue or personal epiphanies. A deeply conservative voter might adopt moderate or progressive stances if they witness effective solutions in practice, while a staunch radical may temper their views upon recognizing pragmatic constraints. These changes can unsettle teammates or community members who prefer consistency, yet they also demonstrate the power of collective influence and evolving insight. To embrace this paradox is to accept that transformation is not only possible but often inevitable, provided the right conditions exist, like open-minded discourse and exposure to new ideas or experiences. This mindset fosters a culture of growth, where group members don't immediately accuse someone of hypocrisy if they change tack, but rather see it as evidence of ongoing learning. Encouraging such elasticity also helps avoid dogmatism, ensuring that the shared vision can adapt to emerging data or shifting contexts. Ultimately, the malleable essence paradox signals that identity is not a rigid statue but a clay sculpture we rework over time. Recognizing this encourages curiosity about how we and those around us might develop further. In a world that often demands we define ourselves in static terms, embracing the possibility of transformation can cultivate empathy, creativity, and a readiness to adjust our collective goals when needed. The subconscious tension. It's easy to think we understand our motivations, Yet the subconscious tension paradox highlights how unrecognized internal conflicts can guide our actions just as strongly as any overt desire. A classic scenario might be someone who professes a yearning for career success but routinely sabotages their professional opportunities, unconsciously fearing the changes such success would bring. The tension between their stated aims and hidden apprehensions creates mixed signals, often manifesting as procrastination or self-defeating behavior. Day to day, these subconscious undercurrents can steer us toward certain relationships or hobbies, perhaps echoing childhood patterns that we're only vaguely aware of. In a group or voting context, subconscious tension can sow confusion and conflict. A committee member may push for transparent communication while simultaneously withholding crucial information, propelled by an unspoken fear of being blamed if things go wrong. Another individual might outwardly advocate for bold innovations yet sabotage these initiatives because of deep-seated anxiety about losing control. Such behavior frustrates colleagues and impedes progress, as it's hard to address a problem rooted in an unacknowledged fear or unmet emotional need. Recognizing the subconscious tension paradox can create a more empathetic space where people feel safe examining not just the rational arguments for their stance, but also the emotional undertones that might complicate it. Instead of focusing solely on logical persuasion, groups that acknowledge this paradox can employ trust-building exercises or open-ended discussions aimed at understanding deeper motives. Ultimately, shining light on these hidden tensions may help dissolve them, allowing more genuine alignment between public statements and private inclinations. While it's unrealistic to expect that every subconscious conflict can be resolved, simply being aware that they exist fosters a more patient, curious environment. Individuals and teams alike benefit from recognizing that contradictory behavior isn't always deliberate deception. It can be the result of old emotional scripts playing out beneath our conscious radar. By naming and exploring this paradox, communities can reduce miscommunication, build stronger relationships, and arrive at decisions that more accurately reflect both the group's collective logic and its underlying emotional landscape. The ambiguous agency. In moments of decisive action, we often feel a sense of personal agency, like pilots charting our destinies. Yet the ambiguous agency paradox questions how much of this control is genuine. External influences like socioeconomic status, cultural background, or even random chance often shape our range of options before we ever think about making a choice. A seemingly bold career switch might be more feasible for someone with financial safety nets, while others remain constrained by responsibilities or lack of resources. This gap can blur the line between free will and circumstance, making it unclear whether we're truly choosing or merely following a path laid out by factors we seldom recognize. During group decisions or voting processes, ambiguous agency can lead to oversights. People might praise a policy as offering equal opportunity, ignoring how historical inequalities or systemic barriers weigh heavily on certain demographics. Or a community might label some members as apathetic for not participating in discussions, without considering the personal or cultural obstacles that discourage engagement. Recognizing this paradox encourages leaders and participants to ask deeper questions. Are people choosing not to vote because they truly don't care? Or do they feel alienated by the system? Is a policy really fair if it doesn't account for starting disparities? Embracing ambiguous agency can prompt more inclusive approaches, such as offering resources or accommodations that acknowledge differing levels of access or influence. By doing so, groups avoid the simplistic narrative that everyone has equal capacity to act upon their wishes. It's not that free will ceases to exist. Rather, it's shaped by the interplay of personal drive and contextual constraints. Ultimately, the ambiguous agency paradox invites us to temper our belief in individual control with an awareness of larger forces at play. If we accept that many of our independent choices unfold within frameworks we didn't set, we can craft more equitable collective decisions, ones that recognize the reality that personal agency is often conditional, not absolute. The proxy self. Sometimes we find ourselves living by the expectations of others, a phenomenon encapsulated by the proxy self paradox. Whether it's a parent's ambition, a partner's dream, or the influence of social media portrayals, we can end up embodying goals that don't necessarily reflect our innermost aspirations. College student, for instance, might pursue a medical degree primarily because their family envisions them as a future doctor, even if the student's true interest lies in art. Over time, the line between genuine desire and borrowed ambition may blur to the point that the proxy self feels real. Eventually, a crisis of identity can ensue when external validation doesn't fill the void left by sidelined personal passions. In collaborative environments, the proxy self paradox emerges when people join initiatives they're not intrinsically drawn to but feel compelled to support for the sake of pleasing mentors, fitting in, or upholding a group identity. During voting or policy discussions, a participant might speak confidently about reforms they don't genuinely believe in, simply to align with a faction they rely on for social standing. That individual's contributions can muddy group decisions, as they're motivated less by personal conviction and more by the need to maintain external approval. Recognizing this paradox encourages a culture that questions, are we pursuing this path because we truly support it, or because we think it's expected of us? Addressing the proxy self often requires honest self-evaluation, allowing individuals to separate their own voices from the chorus of social and familial expectations. Groups can facilitate this by creating spaces where members feel safe expressing doubts or changing stances, rather than punishing deviations from the expected line. When people are permitted to break away from proxies, they may find renewed passion and authenticity in their involvement. Ultimately, this paradox reminds us of the delicate balance between collective influence and individual agency. By acknowledging the possibility that we might be living out someone else's script, we gain the freedom to steer our own course, and that can lead to more genuine, vibrant contributions within any community or team. The nomadic mind, mental wanderlust often pulls us in unpredictable directions, reflecting the nomadic mind paradox, which posits that our thoughts and desires roam like travelers through a vast landscape of possibilities. You might start the day with a clear plan, only to be captivated by a spontaneous idea or a fleeting opportunity that reroutes your focus. This mental nomadism can manifest in big life decisions, switching careers on a whim or relocating to an unfamiliar city, driven more by curiosity than by any grand strategy. While it can lead to serendipitous discoveries, it can also foster restlessness, leaving us unsure about which commitments truly matter. During collective decision-making, the nomadic mind paradox can cause a group's agenda to drift, especially if members are drawn to novel but tangential discussions or impulsive proposals. A committee might begin strategizing about budget allocations, only to end up debating entirely different topics spurred by a random anecdote. Such tangents can be productive if they open fresh avenues of thought, but they risk derailing progress when not guided by a shared sense of direction. Recognizing the paradox involves embracing creativity without sacrificing purpose. Teams can allow a measure of free-roaming brainstorming before realigning to core objectives, ensuring they reap the benefits of mental wanderlust without getting lost in it. On an individual level, acknowledging mental nomadism can relieve guilt about switching interests or pivoting away from paths that no longer spark passion. Accepting that one's mind naturally explores diverse terrains makes it easier to pivot gracefully, focusing less on regret for paths left behind and more on gleaning lessons from each detour. Ultimately, the nomadic mind paradox suggests that restlessness and curiosity needn't be viewed solely as liabilities. They can also be vital forces for innovation and personal growth. By learning to harness our wandering minds within a structured framework, we can strike a balance between stability and exploration, ensuring that our collective decisions benefit from the creative sparks that unpredictability can ignite. The emergent identity. It can be tempting to see identity as something we create for ourselves in isolation. Yet the emergent identity paradox implies that who we are arises in part from interactions with others. A person known for their humor may not consider themselves funny until friends and family consistently react to their wit. Over time, this dynamic feedback loop shapes self-perception. What begins as a few offhand jokes becomes a defining trait because people treat you as though it already were. Social circles, workplaces, and online communities all contribute layers to our emergent identity, reinforcing or challenging the roles we play. In collaborative or voting contexts, this paradox shows up when group members adopt stances or behaviors because that's how the rest of the team sees them. The data expert might keep quiet on creative topics, not because they lack imagination, but because others consistently turn to them only for analytics. Over time, that limited role can crystallize into a cornerstone of how they see themselves, even if it was initially just an incidental label. Recognizing the emergent identity paradox gives groups a chance to break free from pigeonholing members. By encouraging cross-functional exploration, they can reveal hidden aptitudes and create a richer, more adaptive environment. This perspective also offers insight into how social dynamics influence bigger decisions, like political leanings. People who start out undecided may end up strongly identifying with a party or ideology if they're repeatedly cast in that role by peers, either supportive or antagonistic. Aware of this phenomenon, communities can approach issues of belonging and representation with greater sensitivity, understanding that identities aren't just declared but also forged in the crucible of collective perception. Ultimately, the emergent identity paradox reminds us that while we shape ourselves, we do so in dialogue with the social landscapes we inhabit. By consciously guiding how we reflect one another's potential, we foster a shared culture where each person's identity can unfold more fully and authentically. The shape-shifting persona. Every setting we enter can bring forth a slightly different version of who we are, suggesting the shape-shifting persona paradox. You might behave one way at a family gathering, reserved or respectful, yet turn into a spirited raconteur among old college friends. The difference isn't necessarily feigned. It reflects how social context draws out distinct facets of personality. Over time, these variations can become so pronounced that you almost feel like multiple people rolled into one. While this adaptability can be beneficial, helping us fit into diverse environments, it can also create moments of dissonance. Are you truly confident if that quality only surfaces in certain settings but not others? Within group decision-making, shape-shifting can lead to unpredictable stances. A team member known for advocating risk-taking might suddenly act cautious if the discussion involves topics that remind them of past failures. Others could question their sincerity, not realizing that a different social or emotional context elicits different traits. Recognizing this paradox helps the group avoid knee-jerk judgments of inconsistency. Instead, they can explore what conditions trigger changes in a person's approach, fostering an environment where members feel understood rather than scrutinized for every shift in demeanor. This shape-shifting tendency also encourages self-reflection. Rather than condemning ourselves for inconsistency, we can interpret these changes as natural responses to evolving circumstances and interpersonal dynamics. The key is to discern whether each version of ourselves feels authentic or if one is a facade we adopt out of obligation or fear. Embracing the shape-shifting persona paradox means giving ourselves permission to be multifaceted without viewing that as betrayal of a singular identity. For a community, it can mean designing group processes that welcome varying modes of participation, sometimes direct, sometimes reflective, so individuals can engage in a manner that suits their shifting contexts. Ultimately, this paradox highlights both the richness and the complexity of human behavior, reminding us that we're seldom one-dimensional. By valuing adaptability while remaining attentive to deeper alignments, we create collective spaces that respect our many-sided natures. The skeptical convergence. Consensus often appears as an indicator of harmony, yet the skeptical convergence paradox suggests that even widespread agreement can rest on shaky foundations. Groups may reach the same conclusion for entirely different reasons, or because each person harbors doubts they leave unspoken. Imagine a school board unanimously supporting a new policy to extend class hours. One member might vote yes, due to genuine belief in educational benefits. Another might concur to avoid conflict, and a third might assume the policy will fail and be reversed anyway. Outwardly, they've converged, but privately, the level of commitment varies dramatically. This paradox underscores that unity doesn't always reflect true alignment on principles. In a team setting, hasty decisions can be mistaken for consensus when, in reality, each person is simply acquiescing, influenced by social pressure or fear of prolonged debate. After the vote, disagreements can resurface because the unaddressed skepticism festers. Recognizing the skeptical convergence paradox encourages groups to probe deeper whenever they see quick agreement, asking, "What might we be missing or overlooking?" Such questions can unearth silent reservations and foster a more authentic collective stance. A broader conversation, however time-consuming, may prevent future backtracking caused by hidden misgivings. On a personal level, we might experience a version of this paradox when we publicly go along with a crowd, all the while carrying internal uncertainty or entirely different rationale. Although playing along can be socially convenient, it risks misrepresenting our genuine stance. That tension can lead to guilt or frustration down the line, especially if events unfold based on group decisions that never had full, heartfelt buy-in. Ultimately, the skeptical convergence paradox warns that superficial agreement shouldn't be mistaken for rock-solid unity. By actively seeking out dissenting voices or requesting that each participant articulate their viewpoint, groups can distinguish between consensus rooted in true conviction and agreement born from passivity or conflicting motivations. Such clarity not only strengthens collective resolutions but also respects individual autonomy, ensuring that group decisions aren't just a patchwork of unvoiced doubts. The ultimate paradox, after exploring countless angles, self-awareness, evolving identities, subconscious influences, it may appear we've circled back to the idea that the search for a singular truth about who we are is perpetually out of reach. This realization can be summed up in what some might call the ultimate paradox, that every attempt to define our existence and its meaning, whether psychologically or philosophically, often ends in even deeper questions. One might delve into introspection believing they can finally grasp a cohesive identity, only to discover more contradictions and ambiguities lying underneath. Yet rather than being purely disheartening, this loop can also be liberating. If there is no final, unchangeable answer, then there's freedom to adapt, explore, and reinvent as we navigate life. In collaborative discussions or group votes, the ultimate paradox implies that no policy or consensus will ever stand as the definitive solution to every concern. Just as individuals remain in flux, communities must continually reassess their stances, updating their decisions in response to fresh data or evolving social norms. From environmental regulations to educational reforms, what feels optimal today might seem outdated tomorrow, reflecting the reality that both needs and identities shift over time. Embracing this paradox means steering clear of absolutes, instead fostering a culture that tolerates ambiguity and remains open to revision. It also encourages respect for diverse viewpoints, acknowledging that each participant's perspective might be valid in its own right, even if no single viewpoint can fully encapsulate the community's essence. Ultimately, the ultimate paradox offers a sense of humility and potential. The absence of a final answer to what defines us doesn't deny us meaning. It invites ongoing exploration. Every new circumstance or challenge becomes another chapter in our shared narrative rather than a rigid endpoint. Whether we're making personal choices or casting collective votes, we can do so with the understanding that growth and contradiction are natural aspects of the human experience. In this spirit, decisions become steps in a journey rather than declarations of an endpoint, reminding us that the most profound truths about ourselves and our communities may be found not in certainties, but in our willingness to keep seeking. The mental phantom, a momentary flash of confusion, can strike when you realize a belief you've clung to might not be yours at all, an uncanny feeling that a phantom idea has taken residence in your mind. This notion underlies the mental phantom paradox, suggesting that our thoughts and viewpoints can sometimes be absorbed from outside influences rather than genuinely arising from personal conviction. You might recall instances where a friend's strong opinions seemed to settle into your own thinking, or a commercial jingle stubbornly echoed in your head long after you'd stopped caring about the product. Such moments point to the fluid boundaries between our true beliefs and the mental echoes we unwittingly adopt. Daily life is sprinkled with these phantom occurrences. Perhaps you picked a college major because everyone around you said it was prestigious, only to discover years later that you never had a sincere passion for it. In many cases, what seems like a carefully reasoned stance could have originated in a stray comment, a social media debate, or a workplace conversation that left a deeper imprint than you realized. Over time, these phantom ideas can accumulate, shaping our personalities and decisions in ways we barely notice. The paradox emerges when we confidently present such viewpoints as our own, unaware of how they found their way into our inner dialogue. When extended to group decision-making or voting, the mental phantom paradox reveals how collective choices might rest on foundations of borrowed ideas. A policy that appears to have broad support could in fact be a convergence of echoing opinions. Everyone thinks it's popular because they've heard it repeated so often. Recognizing the possibility that some stances aren't as original as they seem can lead groups to question assumptions more openly. Instead of simply tallying agreement, communities could explore the origins of their beliefs, ensuring decisions arise from thoughtful engagement rather than unexamined repetition. Ultimately, addressing this paradox helps both individuals and groups reclaim a clearer sense of authenticity in their convictions. By pausing to sift through which ideas are genuinely self-chosen and which might be borrowed echoes, we strengthen the integrity of our collective efforts and keep our shared decisions tethered to conscious, purposeful reasoning. The transitory breeze, a sudden shift in interests, like waking up one day and losing all desire to pursue a hobby you once adored, can highlight the transitory breeze paradox. The realization that our enthusiasms and goals may pass through our lives as fleetingly as a gentle gust of wind. One month you're collecting vinyl records with fervor, and the next you can't recall the last time you touched a turntable. This isn't necessarily indecision. It can simply reflect how quickly new stimuli and experiences blow into our mental space, changing our motivations in ways we don't always see coming. The breeziness of these shifts challenges the notion that our passions are grounded in a stable, unwavering core. On the surface, such rapid changes might appear superficial. Why invest yourself in something you'll abandon? Yet these short-lived passions can enrich our emotional repertoire, leaving behind traces of experience and insight that shape future pursuits. Think about a person who becomes fascinated by gardening for a few seasons, then moves on to painting. While they may not stick with either activity long-term, each episode can offer lessons in patience, creativity, or technique. It's akin to sampling different musical genres. You might not become an expert in jazz or hip-hop, but tasting each one can deepen your overall appreciation of music. In a collective setting, especially in voting or community initiatives, the transitory breeze paradox can influence how groups rally around issues. A proposal might captivate public interest for a while, only to fade when people's enthusiasm drifts to a newer topic. Officials and organizers often struggle with this phenomenon, as the momentum behind a once urgent cause can evaporate before meaningful action is taken. Recognizing the ephemeral nature of shared enthusiasms can prompt leaders to act swiftly when a collective breeze arrives, harnessing it for tangible outcomes rather than assuming the fervor will last indefinitely. This awareness also encourages realistic timelines and exit strategies, ensuring that when interest does wane, the group can either rekindle it consciously or pivot to a new focus without confusion or guilt. Ultimately, the transitory breeze paradox invites a balanced perspective on changing passions. They needn't be dismissed as flippant, but neither should we assume every fascination will remain a permanent fixture in our personal or communal life. The contradictory identity, any self-description, can be disrupted by a deeper look beneath the surface, revealing strands of personality that clash and collide, a conflict embodied by the contradictory identity paradox. You might present yourself as open-minded, yet bristle at any suggestion that challenges your deeply held beliefs. Perhaps you identify as a free spirit who resists constraints, only to realize you rely on meticulous routines to function each day. These incongruities feel baffling not because they're unnatural, but because our self-narratives often fail to capture the fullness of who we are. Many people attempt to smooth over contradictions, explaining them away as complications or exceptions. But these dissonant elements can be windows into our multifaceted nature. A vegetarian might thoroughly believe in compassionate eating while indulging in fish occasionally during social gatherings, wrestling internally with the mismatch. A political moderate could hold polarizing views on specific hot-button issues yet still consider themselves balanced overall. When contradictions surface, they can spark personal growth by prompting us to refine or expand our perspectives. Instead of condemning these frictions as hypocrisy, we might interpret them as signs of complexity and areas where fresh insights can emerge. In group settings, the contradictory identity paradox becomes visible when a team member advocates for inclusivity yet consistently overlooks minority voices, or when someone campaigns for fiscal conservatism while supporting policies that significantly increase spending. These mixed signals can confuse others and impede consensus, leading some to question the person's reliability or sincerity. Recognizing that contradictions are part of being human can, however, reduce hostility or suspicion. It allows groups to engage in discussions that unpack these mixed signals, inviting members to explore how and why their professed values clash with their actions. Often, this process sheds light on underlying fears or blind spots that can then be addressed collectively. Ultimately, acknowledging the contradictory identity paradox empowers both individuals and communities to approach decision-making with greater empathy. By accepting that conflicting traits or viewpoints can coexist within the same person, we open the door to more nuanced debates and more flexible solutions. Rather than demanding absolute consistency, we can encourage honest introspection that fuels genuine progress, recognizing that what appears contradictory may also hold the key to richer, more comprehensive understanding. The invention of meaning. A lingering unease can arise when you realize that many of the meanings in your life are constructions you and your society have agreed upon. A realization at the core of the invention of meaning paradox. Practices such as celebrating certain holidays, valuing degrees from specific institutions, or championing moral codes often feel deeply significant, yet they can vary dramatically across cultures and eras. The traditions that define major life milestones, weddings, birthdays, graduations, might carry an aura of inevitability, but historically, many of these rites emerged from local customs that gained symbolic power over time. In essence, humanity collectively decides what to value and invests certain events or objects with importance, creating meaning where none might inherently exist. Far from rendering life pointless, this perspective can be surprisingly liberating. When you understand that meaning is, in a sense, up for grabs, you gain the freedom to form new interpretations or to reinvest old customs with fresh significance. A group of close friends, for instance, might create their own shared rituals, like an annual Friends Thanksgiving that holds more personal value than the official holiday. By consciously crafting or adopting meanings, people can shape a personal narrative that resonates more authentically than simply following scripts inherited from outside. In a collective context, the invention of meaning paradox greatly influences how communities mobilize around causes. A social movement can inspire devotion if it persuades enough people that its goals merit sacrifice, effectively inventing a collective narrative that becomes real through shared conviction. Voting outcomes, too, hinge on how a society frames the choices. Labeling a policy as patriotic or progressive can powerfully sway citizens if the terms align with widely embraced narratives. Acknowledging that many of these narratives are social constructions can prompt groups to be more reflective, questioning whether certain meanings genuinely serve the common good or merely preserve historical power structures. Ultimately, understanding that meaning is invented rather than discovered compels us to use our shared creativity carefully. We can choose to sustain or dismantle existing narratives, and we can collaborate to forge more inclusive and uplifting ones. In doing so, we become active participants in shaping our collective reality, highlighting that the stories we tell ourselves about politics, identity, or morality are potent forces capable of uniting or dividing us. By embracing the possibility of reimagining meanings, Groups gain the power to drive change that truly reflects the evolving aspirations of their members. The shadow self, a realization that certain personal traits are kept out of sight, surfacing only in specific contexts, lies at the heart of the shadow self paradox. Someone known for kindness and warmth may discover, under stress, an undercurrent of resentment or aggression they rarely acknowledge. These hidden qualities, often learned or repressed in childhood, can lurk beneath our polished self-images. They emerge in fleeting slips of anger, moments of envy, or subtle power plays that catch us off guard. The paradox is that what we most consciously deny can nevertheless drive our behavior from behind the scenes. Everyday life presents ample opportunities to spot these shadows. A coworker praised for unflappable calm might lash out when a project goes awry, revealing the fiery temper they've carefully concealed. On reflection, they may find that the drive to appear serene overshadowed their need to handle real frustrations. The more we try to disown these less savory attributes, the more they clamor for attention, sometimes erupting in inconvenient or damaging ways. In many cases, we judge others harshly for traits that mirror our own hidden flaws. Recognizing that the qualities we recoil from in others may reflect parts of ourselves can spark a more compassionate, self-aware approach to relationships. In group settings, the shadow self paradox shows up when teams face conflict or competition. A seemingly cohesive group might abruptly fracture, with members accusing each other of selfishness, dishonesty, or power-seeking, characteristics no one claimed to possess. Yet these traits might have been present under the surface, shaped by unconscious dynamics that revolve around status or belonging. By encouraging an environment where uncomfortable discussions can happen without punishment, communities increase the chance of bringing shadow elements to light in a less destructive way. People might then work through them rather than letting them sabotage collective aims. Ultimately, facing the shadow self paradox pushes us to accept that our identities are rarely as tidy as we like to imagine. Embracing all facets of ourselves, including the hidden or socially unacceptable bits, does not condone negative behavior. Rather, it fosters greater self-awareness, opening the path to responsible transformation. In a voting or collective decision-making context, such honesty can prevent buried resentments from derailing discussions. Teams that consciously acknowledge everyone's shadow elements stand a better chance of forging real unity, based not on pretending conflict doesn't exist but on collaboratively managing the tensions that come with being fully human. The enigmatic puzzle. There is a restless itch that arises when we attempt to pin down who we truly are, only to realize each layer of inquiry uncovers another puzzle. This sensation characterizes the enigmatic puzzle paradox, where self-exploration seems to generate more questions than answers. Ask yourself why you prefer certain foods, and the reasons stretch back through culture, upbringing, and personal experiences. Delve into why you hold a political belief, and you find influences from mentors, media narratives, or even childhood role models shaping that stance. The deeper you go, the more factors appear, entangled in ways that defy a single, neat explanation. This paradox extends beyond introspection into group dynamics. When committees or councils examine their collective identity, they may pinpoint core values, only to discover exceptions in real-world scenarios that splinter that unity. Perhaps a neighborhood group prides itself on community spirit but struggles to support inclusive housing, revealing a discrepancy between stated and practiced values. Each new detail, demographic changes, unforeseen budget constraints, emotional attachments to tradition, complicates the portrait of who the group claims to be. The more they investigate, the more they unearth contradictory subnarratives and overlapping loyalties. Yet rather than being purely frustrating, the enigmatic puzzle paradox can foster humility and creativity. Recognizing that we can't fully solve "who am I?" or "what do we believe?" leaves space for continued dialogue. Individuals might refine their beliefs as they uncover fresh layers, while communities that accept the riddle-like nature of identity remain more open to diverse perspectives. The acceptance of this complexity can become a strength. It urges teams to revisit policies or procedures periodically, ensuring that shifting concerns and newly revealed nuances get woven into decision-making. In daily life, grappling with the layers of our own complexity can be disorienting, but it also encourages personal growth. People who view identity as an ever-evolving puzzle are less likely to see change or contradiction as a crisis. Likewise, in voting or collective choices, embracing the mystery behind communal identities can lead to more flexible, adaptive policies. The enigmatic puzzle paradox reminds us that both self-discovery and communal definition are works in progress, enriched rather than thwarted by the fact that each answer spawns more questions. The woven illusion. A striking insight emerges when we consider just how many roles, memories, and projected ideals come together to shape our daily sense of self, forming what might be called a woven illusion. Much like an intricate tapestry, our identity is stitched from threads of childhood experiences, cultural norms, personal achievements, and even the hopes and fears we haven't openly acknowledged. Over time, this fabric becomes so elaborate that we forget it was ever pieced together. We treat the resulting tapestry as an organic whole, a me that stands independently. The illusion sets in when we assume that removing any single strand, say, a past relationship or a professional accomplishment, would leave the essence of who we are intact. Occasional disruptions remind us of how interwoven our identity is. A job loss or the end of a long-term friendship can feel surprisingly destabilizing, even if those aspects once seemed peripheral to our core. The sense of self unravels a bit, revealing that so-called minor threads played a significant role in holding the tapestry together. This realization can be both daunting and liberating. On one hand, it exposes how fragile our constructed identity can be. On the other, it underscores that we have the power to weave new threads, new interests, relationships, or philosophies into the ever-shifting pattern of our lives. In collective decisions or voting scenarios, the woven illusion paradox manifests when groups anchor their identity in traditions or shared myths that appear inseparable from their essence. A community might assume that discarding a long-standing custom would destroy its core values, even though those traditions were themselves woven over years, influenced by changing circumstances and outside inspirations. By acknowledging how fluid these foundational threads really are, communities can navigate policy changes with greater adaptability, trusting they can reweave or replace certain elements without losing their collective spirit. Ultimately, recognizing the woven illusion invites a gentler approach to personal and collective transformation. If we accept that our identities, both individual and communal, are assembled from many strands, we can handle the process of altering or removing any thread with more assurance. The tapestry might shift in design but won't necessarily disintegrate. This perspective offers a balance between cherishing the integrity of what we've created and staying open to beneficial changes that can enrich our shared fabric over time. The self-erosion, a creeping sensation that parts of you are gradually wearing away, be it an old passion, a once-sharp skill, or a deeply held conviction, marks the self-erosion paradox. It's as though certain aspects of who you were are dissolving, replaced by newer interests or overshadowed by life's relentless demands. A musician might lose the calluses on their fingertips as practice hours dwindle, or a fervent believer in a cause could feel that zeal slipping away under the weight of daily routines. While some might interpret this as a sign of decline or loss, it can equally be an indicator of change or redirection, depending on one's perspective. Day-to-day experiences often accelerate this erosion. Economic pressures, for example, may push someone away from an artistic pursuit they once cherished, resulting in the slow fade of an identity they had long embraced. Friendships or family roles can morph, prompting shifts in how you see yourself. A parent who once thrived on spontaneous adventure might find that predictable routines become the new norm, quietly eroding that adventurous spark. The paradox lies in our tendency to view these natural transitions as failures instead of part of ongoing growth. After all, letting go of certain traits or beliefs can create space for fresh ones. When extended to group dynamics, self-erosion can manifest in communities that gradually lose their unifying spirit. A volunteer organization might start strong but feel its commitment slipping over time, worn down by bureaucratic hurdles or the slow churn of everyday tasks. Members who initially joined out of passion may find themselves disengaging, uncertain whether the group still aligns with their evolving values. Recognizing this erosion doesn't have to lead to defeatism. It can serve as a wake-up call. Groups that actively acknowledge changing motivations can adjust goals, revitalize processes, and invite new energy into the fold. Ultimately, the self-erosion paradox isn't simply about decay but about recognizing and adapting to the processes of change that define both personal and collective lives. Acknowledging what's slipping away gives individuals and groups the chance to decide whether to fight for its retention or let it go with grace. In this way, erosion can signal not just an ending, but the start of a new chapter where different strengths and aspirations take center stage. By learning to see erosion as a transformative force, communities and individuals alike can better navigate the evolution of identities and commitments, forging more sustainable paths forward. The illusory possession. A disquieting notion emerges when you pause to consider that the traits and belongings you believe you own might only be borrowed from the flow of existence. This principle underpins the illusory possession paradox, where even our supposed innermost qualities, confidence, humility, or resilience, might be traced to genes, social conditioning, or happenstance rather than any proprietary self. A person who prides themselves on unyielding optimism might reconsider that stance if they discover the trait is partly due to an inherited predisposition or an environment that never truly tested their resolve. Similarly, external possessions, house, even relationships, can vanish abruptly under events beyond our control. Far from being purely negative, this realization can foster a liberating detachment. If nothing is fully ours, then losses might hurt less and gains could be appreciated with humility. Life becomes a dance of participation rather than ownership. You don't have to feel crushed when the intangible sense of certainty you once had dissolves, because it was never wholly your creation to begin with. It's akin to borrowing a library book. You cherish it for a while but understand it must eventually return to its broader circulation. In group settings, the illusory possession paradox highlights how communities might cling to a sense of exclusive hold over identities, traditions, or territories. A town might fiercely guard its cultural practices, believing they possess them. Yet those practices could have originated centuries ago under different influences. As new generations arrive or the socioeconomic fabric shifts, the community's ownership reveals itself as temporary stewardship. Similarly, a group's strongly held solution to a problem might just be a transient fix, subject to revision or replacement by future members. Ultimately, recognizing this paradox encourages a more flexible and generous outlook toward both personal identity and collective decisions. Instead of rigidly defending what we think we own, our beliefs, goals, or resources, we might invest effort in stewarding them responsibly for however long they remain in our care. Such an approach can lead to more collaborative and open-minded discussions, where letting go of outdated practices or beliefs becomes less of a personal affront and more an acknowledgement that nothing is guaranteed forever. This perspective, while it can feel unsettling, often empowers people to adapt gracefully, collaborate wisely, and appreciate what they have for however long it remains theirs to hold. The mental phantom, occasionally, you might catch yourself replaying a thought or feeling an emotion that doesn't entirely seem like your own. A flash of recognition that sets the mental phantom paradox into motion. It's as if certain ideas have lodged themselves in your mind through repeated exposure, from catchy advertisements or persuasive peers, cloaking themselves as original insights. Think of how a clever slogan can shape your opinion on social issues, even though you've never rigorously examined its premise. With time, that borrowed stance can become part of your internal monologue, influencing your decisions in ways you barely notice. Such phantoms can reveal themselves in small, everyday choices, ordering a specific drink at a cafe because it's cool, or automatically dismissing a genre of music because you've internalized someone else's critique. Viewed in isolation, these might seem trivial, but collectively, they guide much of our conduct. Recognizing that we can adopt viewpoints without true personal vetting invites us to re-examine long-held positions, some of which might be unmoored from actual preference or logic. The paradox arises when we realize our sense of personal agency may be less about forging new paths and more about parading secondhand ideas we've absorbed unconsciously. In a group or voting environment, the mental phantom paradox might explain sudden surges of consensus around proposals that are never seriously debated. A phrase repeated in the media or by charismatic leaders can lodge in the collective psyche, morphing into a seemingly universal truth. Because so few people question it, the notion spreads unchallenged. Over time, dissenters might feel alienated, believing themselves at odds with a majority that never scrutinized its inherited stance. Once the group recognizes this pattern, they can pause to dissect how much of their unity stems from genuine shared values versus the echo of a catchy narrative. Confronting this paradox doesn't mean dismissing all influence as inauthentic. It simply highlights the need to be cautious about how we absorb or adopt beliefs. By urging ourselves and our communities to identify phantom echoes, we can recalibrate our decisions. Each person gains the chance to reclaim genuine choice, and each group can set policies aligned with truly examined perspectives. In doing so, the collective outcome better reflects actual convictions, rather than the ghostly imprint of unvetted ideas. The transient fragment. Sometimes you only grasp how transient your passions or goals are when you're confronted with a wholly new experience, prompting the transient fragment paradox. A once devout athlete might abandon their training upon discovering a latent artistic talent, or a homebody might morph into a travel enthusiast after an inspiring trip abroad. While these shifts can be exciting, they also highlight how easily what we consider our core can fragment. We may realize that a love for literature, a political affiliation, or even a stable relationship is but one fragment of a bigger, ever-evolving puzzle, and that fragment might be replaced or rearranged. These fragments often arise from chance encounters. Conversation with a stranger, a sudden epiphany while reading a random article, or an unplanned detour during a vacation can reshape our self-image. The paradox lies in our habit of treating each new fragment as though it might be the definitive piece. It's understandable. Discovering a fresh passion can feel like a revelation, yet it remains vulnerable to future changes. Rather than indicating a lack of commitment, this fluidity can reflect a willingness to explore uncharted territories of growth. Group decisions also reflect transient fragments when people rally around an issue passionately, then drop it as soon as another pressing concern surfaces. A community might invest in a beautification project wholeheartedly until an economic downturn redirects attention to job creation. Or a political cause might fade from headlines the moment a new crisis takes precedence. Recognizing how quickly communal focus can shift helps planners and leaders set realistic timelines, expecting that enthusiasm can wane and priorities can change. This acknowledgement can inspire strategies that either solidify the short-term gains quickly or establish structures to keep the interest alive longer. Accepting the transient fragment paradox fosters flexibility. Instead of viewing every personal shift or group pivot as a betrayal of earlier commitments, we can interpret it as part of a continuous search for alignment with current needs and insights. Whether an individual or a community, recognizing that attachments might not be permanent doesn't have to be disheartening. It can serve as a reminder to harness the motivation while it lasts, achieving meaningful results before the winds shift again. In this way, the paradox underscores both the potential and impermanence embedded in every decision or passion we embrace. The illusory aggregate. Every now and then, you might find yourself compiling a list of your best qualities: organized, empathetic, creative, only to realize that these labels don't always act in harmony, encapsulating the illusory aggregate paradox. It's as if you're a patchwork of traits rather than a unified entity. Being organized might falter under pressure, or empathetic might clash with assertive in certain confrontations, revealing how these descriptors we piece together don't always merge seamlessly. Instead of forming a neat sum, they sometimes coexist in tension, leading to unexpected behavior shifts. In normal routines, this tension can manifest as feeling conflicted about how to respond to people or problems. You might love spontaneity when planning vacations but insist on strict routines in your work life. Or you might champion kindness in social interactions yet find yourself being harshly critical in self-talk. The paradox is that none of these traits are false, but they don't combine into a single, stable personality the way a chemistry formula might predictably bond elements. Instead, each quality emerges depending on context, mood, or recent experiences. When extended to group scenarios, the illusory aggregate paradox appears in how communities or teams brand themselves. A club might be simultaneously known for inclusivity and elitism, welcoming to newcomers in principle but inadvertently cliquish in practice. A political party might stand for fiscal restraint yet consistently support costly proposals. Observers outside the group can find these mixed messages perplexing or hypocritical, but often they arise from genuinely different strands of collective identity. Recognizing this doesn't eliminate the contradictions, yet it fosters patience. It reminds us that even at an organizational level, identity is more of a mosaic than a monolith. Ultimately, the illusory aggregate paradox invites a less judgmental view of both self and community. Contradictory elements might not indicate deception but reflect the complexity inherent in any living system. Embracing this understanding allows for more fluid self-development, where conflicting traits aren't necessarily repressed but given room to evolve. Likewise, for a team or neighborhood, acknowledging internal paradoxes can spur thoughtful dialogue on how to reconcile or at least manage the incongruities. By doing so, groups can aim for genuine progress without insisting on an overly simplistic uniformity that denies the nuance of real human dynamics. The nonlinear journey. It's easy to assume that self-improvement follows a steady upward trajectory. Yet the nonlinear journey paradox counters this assumption by highlighting how personal and collective progress can loop, dip, or stall. A passionate learner might devour books on a subject for months, then abruptly lose interest, only to pick it up again years later with renewed vigor. Meanwhile, the learner's knowledge base could evolve in a zigzag, revisiting old areas at a higher level of understanding each time. This isn't regression, necessarily. It can signal a deeper assimilation of ideas that emerges in fits and starts instead of a neat, linear climb. Everyday life abounds with these nonlinear patterns. An individual trying to adopt healthier habits might cycle through phases of dedication, burnout, and renewed commitment. Relationships can deepen for a while, then plateau, and eventually pick up an even stronger connection if nurtured through rough patches. The paradox arises when we feel frustrated that progress isn't straightforward. We may judge ourselves or others harshly for backsliding, not realizing that such detours often allow for integration or reevaluation. In group decision-making, the nonlinear journey paradox surfaces when organizations tackle complex projects. A city council aiming to reduce traffic congestion might implement a plan, observe partial success, then encounter setbacks that require rethinking the strategy. While critics might label these course corrections as failures, they can actually form part of a dynamic learning process. Each loop back to the drawing board reveals a new layer of insight. By acknowledging this, groups can adopt more flexible timelines and metrics, focusing on iterative improvements rather than fixating on a single definitive solution. Recognizing the nonlinear journey paradox ultimately helps us be gentler with ourselves and our communities. Growth can be less about an uninterrupted ascent and more about evolving through cyclical patterns. Plateaus and relapses can offer valuable lessons that refine our ultimate path. For groups, embracing the paradox fosters resilience, as they come to expect and adapt to inevitable twists and turns. Instead of forcing a forced march toward linear success, teams can celebrate small advances and learn from each stall or sidetrack. This mindset often produces more sustainable outcomes, since it aligns with how most real-world transformations unfold, messy, meandering, but still inching forward over time. The thought paradox, the mind's capacity to generate endless what-if scenarios, can both enlighten and trap us, giving rise to what might be called the thought paradox. On one hand, It fosters creativity, enabling you to anticipate potential solutions to problems before they arise. On the other, it can spiral into overthinking, dwelling on countless hypothetical pitfalls or regrets that never materialize. A person might freeze when deciding whether to change careers, endlessly weighing every angle until an opportunity passes by. This capacity for deep thought, which sets us apart as reflective beings, can paradoxically impede decisive action if not balanced with pragmatism. In daily interactions, you might see this paradox in how someone prepares for a difficult conversation. They'll rehearse multiple outcomes, positive, negative, or neutral, trying to be fully ready. While thoroughness is commendable, it can also lead to self-conscious rigidity if they become so attached to one script that they fail to read real-time cues. The conversation might then feel artificial or stilted, missing genuine connection. The paradox emerges. Thinking is essential for growth, yet excessive or rigid thought can stifle spontaneity and authenticity. Group decisions or voting scenarios likewise feel the pull of the thought paradox. A committee might spend endless hours predicting worst-case scenarios for a policy, leaving members exhausted and indecisive. Meanwhile, a rival group with less deliberation might push forward, implementing solutions, flawed as they may be, before the first group finalizes its plan. Overanalysis can hamper timely action, even though risk assessment is crucial for informed choices. Recognizing this tension can prompt communities to adopt a structured approach, gather sufficient data, encourage healthy debate, then set a clear point to transition from contemplation to decision. Ultimately, the thought paradox reminds us that thinking is both a gift and a potential pitfall. Critical reflection keeps us mindful and prepared, but once you've reasonably weighed your options, lingering in hypotheticals can erode confidence and momentum. For individuals, learning to recognize when thoughtfulness crosses into rumination can be a game changer in personal effectiveness. For groups, establishing guidelines around decision timelines ensures that thoroughness doesn't devolve into inaction. In either case, awareness of this paradox can steer people toward a healthier middle ground, where deliberation coexists with timely, grounded steps forward. The threshold being, occasional moments in life invite you to step across a boundary you didn't realize was there. Moments that reveal the threshold being paradox, where your identity seems poised on the brink between one version of yourself and another. Maybe you're on the verge of moving to a new city, torn between excitement for opportunity and nostalgia for what you leave behind. Or perhaps you're weighing the decision to speak out on an issue you care about, sensing that once you do, you'll see yourself as an activist rather than a quiet bystander. Standing at this threshold can be exhilarating and terrifying, as stepping through can permanently alter your sense of who you are. These transitions might be dramatic, graduation, marriage, switching careers, or subtle, like deciding to let go of a lingering resentment. Often the greatest tension arises not from the actual change but from that moment of hesitation right before you commit. You're neither your old self nor the new one, you're hovering in between. The paradox lies in the realization that identity can revolve around these boundary experiences, even though each threshold feels unique and final at the time. In fact, a life viewed in hindsight may show a series of thresholds, each shaping you in ways you wouldn't have predicted. In group decision-making, the threshold being paradox might emerge when an organization contemplates a major pivot, introducing a new product, adopting a radical policy stance, or restructuring leadership. Team members could feel torn. One part of them sees the necessity for change, while another clings to the security of tradition. This liminal stage can stall progress until someone voices the collective anxiety, acknowledging that crossing the threshold requires a leap of faith. Once recognized, the group can channel that tension into a clear plan, deliberate on risks, refine strategies, and then make the leap together, reshaping the organization's identity in the process. Ultimately, confronting this paradox means understanding that identity, both personal and communal, is formed in large part by these pivotal decisions. Each threshold crossed redefines who we are and sets a new baseline for future growth. Instead of resisting or prolonging the tension, Individuals and communities can prepare for transitions by openly discussing the fears and hopes that arise. In doing so, they transform the threshold from a source of dread into an empowering catalyst, reminding everyone involved that evolution often hinges on the courage to step forward, even when the future remains uncertain. The dissolving substance. One striking realization is how quickly the so-called essence of who we are can melt away under scrutiny, capturing the dissolving substance paradox. You might meticulously craft an identity as a confident speaker, but a single moment of stage fright can make that confidence vanish, leaving you unsure whether it was ever genuine in the first place. Or you may define yourself as a dedicated caregiver until an unexpected bout of resentment surfaces, challenging your self-image and making you question the solidity of your compassion. Each time we attempt to hold onto one defining attribute, it seems to slip through our mental fingers. Daily interactions illustrate this dissolving act. You could revel in your role as the adventurous friend on a Saturday hike, only to discover on Monday that you feel too exhausted to maintain that persona. The illusions of permanence crack when confronted by fluctuating energy levels, emotions, and external demands. Rather than pointing to superficiality, these moments hint at the fluidity of our inner makeup. Trying to anchor your identity too firmly in a single trait can backfire if that trait proves situational rather than absolute. In collective decisions, the dissolving substance paradox emerges when a group's self-concept dissolves under pressure. A team might proudly claim, "We're innovative," yet revert to conventional methods when faced with tight deadlines or uncertain budgets. Observers might accuse them of hypocrisy, but in truth, the tension highlights how identity statements can collapse if underlying conditions change. By recognizing this potential fragility, groups can adopt more malleable approaches, balancing their aspirations with realistic contingency plans. Rather than branding themselves once and for all, they can remain open to evolving definitions of who they are and what they can accomplish. Confronting the dissolving substance paradox doesn't have to breed cynicism. Instead, it can free individuals and communities from the burden of clinging to fixed self-images. If traits can dissolve and reappear, then mistakes or setbacks don't have to define you permanently, nor does an organization have to be locked into one approach. Embracing the possibility that even our most cherished attributes might dissolve under new circumstances allows for resilience, adaptation, and the graceful acceptance of change. In voting or policymaking, this view can encourage flexible guidelines that evolve with the community's shifting identity, reinforcing the idea that progress often thrives in environments open to transformation rather than anchored by rigid absolutes. The ever-shifting mind. Sometimes you catch yourself rethinking a choice you were absolutely certain about the day before, highlighting the ever-shifting mind paradox. It's not merely a matter of second-guessing, it's that our cognitive and emotional landscapes are in constant flux, shaped by new information, changing moods, or social interactions. You could wholeheartedly embrace a minimalist lifestyle for a few months, only to find yourself later enthralled by collecting vintage items, feeling no contradiction at all, until you reflect on how divergent those two pursuits seem. This volatility can inspire curiosity but also fuel frustration when you crave a stable sense of identity. While we often view flip-flops or abrupt changes in opinion as weaknesses, they can also reveal our human capacity to adapt and learn. A stance that seemed logical at one point may become outdated when fresh evidence or different circumstances appear. Even deeply rooted beliefs, like moral views or lifelong ambitions, might evolve if confronted by compelling events. Think of how many people shift religious or political affiliations after significant life experiences. The paradox emerges because we simultaneously value consistency and need the flexibility to revise outdated viewpoints. In a group or voting context, the ever-shifting mind paradox means that consensus achieved at one moment might unravel if members' perspectives shift. A team might vote unanimously in favor of a project, yet after a few days of reflection or external feedback, half the group could reconsider. Critics might label this inconsistency or lack of commitment, but it might actually indicate that the participants are genuinely absorbing new insights. To manage this, Groups can structure a review phase or follow-up vote, acknowledging that opinions can evolve and that an initial consensus may not be the final word. Ultimately, navigating the ever-shifting mind paradox involves embracing the reality that personal and communal identities are not carved in stone. Instead of condemning fluidity as indecisiveness, we can view it as a reflective process crucial for intellectual and moral growth. That said, setting some boundaries, like deadlines or guidelines for reopening debates, can prevent perpetual indecision. By balancing openness to change with practical decision-making frameworks, individuals and groups can channel this perpetual evolution into continuous improvement rather than chaos. In this way, the paradox becomes a catalyst for deeper understanding and adaptive progress, rather than a source of paralysis. The abstract continuum. There is a subtle sense that although we treat life as a series of distinct phases, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, they're all points on an abstract continuum where each version of ourselves blends into the next. This paradox becomes evident when you reflect on your teenage years and struggle to pinpoint the precise moment you became an adult, or when you look back on a once foreign concept and realize you've gradually embraced it over time without noticing the shift. The continuum is abstract because it defies exact definition. Transitions occur so gradually that they become clear only in hindsight, if ever. Daily routines provide glimpses of how we occupy multiple points on this continuum simultaneously. Perhaps you're financially independent yet still rely emotionally on family, revealing that while part of you has moved forward, another part lingers in an earlier stage. Similarly, you might find your worldview advanced in one area, like technology, while it remains conservative in another, like social traditions. The paradox is that we attempt to categorize these developments into neat boxes: young, adult, beginner, expert, when reality flows more seamlessly. For group decisions and voting, the abstract continuum paradox appears in generational shifts or organizational changes that happen incrementally. A company that once prided itself on being cutting edge may slowly adopt traditional structures as it expands, not by any one conscious choice but through a series of small, practical decisions. Observers might notice the transformation only after it's well underway. When communities realize that transitions rarely occur in one big leap, they can plan for phased adjustments. Policies might be introduced gradually, with the understanding that consensus evolves piece by piece rather than flipping overnight. Ultimately, the abstract continuum paradox encourages a more nuanced perception of development. Whether at the individual or collective level, change doesn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful. Consistent shifts can accumulate into significant transformations. Accepting that we're always somewhere in between what we were and what will become nurtures patience and tolerance, for ourselves, as we transition through life stages, and for others, who may be on different points along their own continuum. Embracing this slow-burn approach to growth can lead to more inclusive, patient collaboration, where each step forward is valued rather than overshadowed by the quest for sudden breakthroughs. The recursive self. Occasionally, a person might feel as though they're watching themselves watch themselves, an internal feedback loop that encapsulates the recursive self paradox. You might be in the middle of a conversation and suddenly notice not just your words, but your meta-observation of how you're speaking, prompting you to adjust your tone or choice of phrases. It's a cycle of self-awareness that can heighten clarity but also induce anxiety, as you become hyper-conscious of each action and the reflection upon that action. This loop can expand outward, with you reflecting on your reflections, and so on, sometimes leading to mental spirals or indecision. Daily situations offer plenty of triggers for recursive thought. Trying on a new outfit, for example, might involve monitoring how you appear in the mirror and simultaneously imagining how others will judge you. That second level of awareness can alter your stance or expression. The paradox is that while self-awareness is often seen as a virtue, excessive layering of it can stunt spontaneity. In trying to perfect your presentation, you might lose the authentic core that makes communication resonate. In group or voting contexts, the recursive self-paradox plays out when committees or councils become overly cautious, constantly double-checking not just their decisions but the process of making decisions. Such hyperanalysis may lead to policies laden with disclaimers or complexities, born from the fear that future observers will critique the group's approach. While a measured amount of self-critique improves accountability, excessive recursion can generate bureaucratic delays or an environment where no one feels confident to act. Teams that acknowledge this paradox might establish clear frameworks for introspection, set times to review decisions, specify criteria for reevaluation, rather than letting incessant self-checking disrupt progress. Addressing the recursive self paradox means finding balance. Healthy self-awareness can enhance empathy, prevent rash judgments, and refine personal or collective goals. Yet taken to extremes, it can morph into self-conscious stasis. By setting practical boundaries, such as time-limited reflection or periodic outside evaluations, individuals and groups can benefit from introspection without becoming trapped in it. This fosters an atmosphere where people feel safe to be both mindful and decisive. Ultimately, the paradox highlights that while reflection is a key part of growth, it must be guided by purposeful action to avoid becoming a self-reinforcing loop that hinders rather than helps. The ultimate paradox, after wading through countless reflections on the nature of identity, ranging from the fragility of self-images to the hidden forces shaping our choices, it might seem that each answer dissolves into new uncertainties. This cycle points to the ultimate paradox. The more we seek a firm, final definition of who we are, the more elusive it becomes. Every time you think you've pinned down a core trait or belief, context or further introspection reveals exceptions or contradictions. In this sense, identity can be more like a shifting tapestry than a carved-in-stone portrait, with threads changing color as soon as you focus on them. For many, this revelation carries a mixture of discomfort and liberation. It can be disconcerting to sense that there's no unassailable ground beneath your feet, no unchanging I to rely upon. Yet there's also freedom in accepting that life is a continuous flow, open to reinvention, and the blending of seemingly incompatible traits. Past experiences, relationships, and cultural influences all weave into our evolving story, but none single-handedly holds the final word on who we are. The paradox is that by releasing the need for absolute certainty, we may find a more genuine sense of self, one that is fluid, reflective, and enriched by ongoing discovery. At a collective level, the ultimate paradox challenges communities to stay flexible in their identities and decisions. Policies and consensus that once felt certain can lose relevancy under shifting social norms or new data. A city known for heavy industry might transition into a tech hub, redefining its collective self in response to economic and environmental factors. Embracing the paradox doesn't mean giving up on principles. It means acknowledging that those principles might need to adapt over time. Voting outcomes and group stances can thus be seen as snapshots in an evolving narrative rather than once-and-for-all verdicts. In the end, the ultimate paradox suggests that the quest for a single, definitive essence, whether personal or communal, is both noble and inherently unattainable. Realizing that identity remains in flux can ease the fear of change and encourage continuous learning. By reframing ourselves and our groups as works in progress, we allow room for curiosity, resilience, and deeper compassion. It becomes less about finding the final truth of who we are, and more about welcoming the perpetual unfolding of what we might become.